Meeting is called to order at 10:06. Let's see. Vice Chair, do you want to take roll call?
Yes. Chair, Patricia Trouth.
Present.
Mark Truscott, Vice Chair. Present. Andrew Bowden.
Present.
David Allen Taylor, Jr.
Present.
All accounted for.
Thank you. And today we also have Tien Fang that's joining us from the California Architects Board. Thank you. Okay, just some procedural remarks. As you all know, the meeting is being webcast, and at approximately 11 o'clock, we will have the new Department of Consumer Affairs Director, Dean Rafilo, will be joining us. So wherever we're at on our agenda, we'll just table our discussion so that we can accommodate his schedule. I also want to introduce the new Department of Consumer Affairs Staff Counsel, Tara Welch. And both Tara and Rebecca will be participating in today's meeting as our legal counsel. Okay, we'll be taking a lunch break at approximately 12 noon. And I wanted to rearrange the agenda a bit and move item I regarding Clarke, move it up on the agenda. And then just as a reminder, the voting requirements are that all motions and seconds will be repeated for the record, and then votes on all motions will be taken by roll call. Okay. So at this time, I'd like to see if there's any public comment, and this is for items that are not on the agenda. Okay, very good. Then we'll move on. Let's see. So agenda item D. Can I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from April 18th LATC meeting?
So moved. I'll second.
Mark, you want to take roll call?
Yes, I will. Patricia Trouth.
Present, or I approve.
Approved. There you go. Mark Truscott, yes. Andrew Bowden.
Aye.
David Allen Taylor, Jr.
Aye.
4-0. Pass. Approved.
Okay, so let's go to the agenda item I. Okay, so the first Clarke agenda item is to update and possible action on the landscape architect registration exam administration and pass rates. So, I'm sorry.
So
Okay.
attached you have the pass rates for the March and April 2017 layer. And the next layer will be held in August from the 7th to the 19th. So do you happen to have any questions or comments on the pass rate? We can move on.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the only comment is that it looks like we lag behind here in California in terms of national average.
It's been like that in previous talks. I don't know if Doug wanted to mention, but there's a lot going on. A lot to be looked at. So we've at previous meetings, they considered, maybe talking to the schools or trying to increase those pass rates. But I think from talks with Clarke and everything, there's a lot that can be influencing those pass rates. So it might not, and we can't really say it's just California schools because not all California applicants went to school in California. So.
We don't need to get into the weeds with that.
Yeah, this is just my personal opinion, but I think that we have a lot of diversity in California, and I think it does impact the scores at times. I know I've had some staff that, are from other countries, and they've made comments, about the difficulty sometimes. So, okay. Any other comments on that item? Okay. Okay.
I.2 is review and approve the contract with Clarke for the layer. Our previous contract expired on June 30th of this year, so this next contract for administration of the LAIR will be through June 30th of 2020. It's attached for your review and approval, possibly.
Just to augment a little bit, this is the normal and customary agreement we have for the board with the NCARB contract. The language is driven by the Department of General Services, so our ability to shape boilerplate language from above is pretty limited if it exists at all. So I won't call it a formality that it's in your packet, but we need to approve it.
Okay. And this is for a 3-year time period?
Correct.
Okay. Any other, Andy?
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept and approve the standard agreement with Clarke for the period of, July 1st, 2017 through 2020, April 2020.
I'll second that motion. Roll call. Patricia Trout. I'm sorry.
You just
Oh,
want to make sure
excuse
before
me.
each vote.
Sorry.
Okay, public comment?
Just clarification, so there's no cost involved?
No.
It's no cost contract?
It's a $0 contract that we have.
Okay, so we have a second? Okay.
Roll call. Patricia Trout.
Yes.
Mark Truscott, yes. Andrew Bowden.
Aye.
David Allen Taylor Jr.
Aye.
Pass.
Okay, then the next agenda item.
I'll actually take over from here with I. Agenda item I.3 is review of Clarke September 14th through 16th, 2017 annual meeting agenda. The annual meeting, Clarke's annual meeting rather, will be held in Boise from the 14th through the 16th. We've included the agenda just for the committee's review. High level, it's going to cover a vote on the proposed model law and regulations, as well as updates on the LAIR performance, and then there'll be discussion about the current regulatory climate and things going on with the profession. So this one is just for your pleasure. We have the agenda here for your review.
Okay. Thank you. Any comments? Do I need to ask the public each time for each one of these?
When you have a motion.
Oh, one each. Okay, let's see.
If there aren't any questions from the committee about this, I can move on to the next item.
Yes, please.
Okay. So then moving on to agenda item I.4, this is further Clarke action. On June 20th, Clarke released its final slate of candidates for the Board of Directors on the Committee of Nominations, the Board of Directors, Committee on Nominations, and the Region 5 Director elections. With regard to the Board of Director and Committee on Nominations elections, the LATC is asked to supply them with a completed ballot either in advance of their annual meeting, so they're asking it by September 8th, or for us to bring it to the annual meeting for submission. So, and then with regard to the Region 5 Director, there's going to be a webcast in August where they're asking for votes to be placed, and I believe the webcast date is coming out next week, and I believe they're asking for us to supply them with a designee who will be providing that vote. So we've included in this agenda item the entire slate of candidates and their bios, as well as the election ballot and credentials letter template that we would be submitting to Clarke. So what we're asking the committee is to review this final slate of candidates for the Board of Directors, Committee on Nominations, and Region 5 Director, and take possible action in determining how we will go ahead and vote in these elections.
Okay, the one thing I noticed on the ballot, it doesn't have anything regarding, Region 5. So,
I think that's because that's a separate election with that being the webcast.
okay.
Yeah, so the Region 5 nominees are in that slate of
Right.
candidates. Courtney, you might be able to validate that.
During the webcast.
It'll be voted on during the webcast, okay. And do we know the date of the webcast?
No, when I was looking through my email history, the latest that I've seen is that they're saying the week of July 17th, which will be next week, is when they'll announce that webcast date. I just know it's going to be in August.
Okay. I'm curious if, what board members are planning on participating in that? This August Clarke
Oh, on the,
webcast.
more than likely I will,
Okay.
depending on the date you select.
Okay, yeah, I'm out 2 weeks in August, so, okay,
I'm not available.
okay,
I expect to participate in that.
okay. Okay, so,
I'm not available today.
okay, do we need to have any more discussion on that? So, one of you will then convey,
For the Region 5 director, yes.
for the Region 5 director, okay. What about the other candidates? So,
If I may,
yes,
there are two candidates for the vice president
right.
Position, Brian Dougherty and Stan Millen.
Mhm.
I happen to know Brian Dougherty.
Uh-huh.
He was a trustee with me on the American Society of Landscape Architects.
Uh-huh,
And so I know him, I don't know Stan Williams. So
Mhm.
if I had to pick between the two, I would pick Brian Dougherty because he was a very good trustee and
Mhm.
very level-headed.
okay.
I don't know anybody else on the nomination slate.
Okay, then, yeah.
I know Brian also would support Andy's thoughts on that. I also know Craig Coronado, one of the nominees for the Committee on Nominations, and also find him to be extremely effective and organized. And I served with him on national committees through ASLA.
And he's, what is he running for?
Committee on Nominations. We select 2 of 4 candidates.
Okay, so, can I have a motion regarding the vice presidential candidate? Or do we want more discussion? Or do we need to do it now? I don't recall voting on this last year.
And if I may,
Yeah.
it seems to me, and Andy, maybe you might remember this as well, that in the past it's been kind of delegated to a couple of the board members to meet outside of this group,
Okay.
put our heads together and work with our program manager to come up with the recommendations and present that to the board.
Okay,
Does that sound
Yeah, I think that's what we've done
in the past?
okay. Okay, so, DJ, you and Andy will,
Yeah.
I support that.
yes, that sounds good. Do we need to make that a motion? That, Andy and DJ will, coordinate regarding the election ballot?
Rebecca,
They're going to discuss it and finalize who we are moving forward as the LATC committee.
If it's administrative to just file a vote, that's one thing, but I think if you're delegating the actual decision-making is a little more problematic. You as a body should be making the actual decision, and then they can launch or actually execute the decision.
I'd like to make a motion, please.
Okay,
I'd like to have this body vote for the following candidates for each position at Clarke. President-elect Phil Meyer, Vice President Brian Dougherty, Treasurer Carrie Baird, Committee on Nominations Craig Coronado, and Carissa McMullen.
I second it.
is there any additional discussion?
Out of curiosity, there are 4 candidates here. Mark, how did you settle on Carissa McMullen as the second?
Well, I do not know the other 3 candidates, but I reviewed what they had submitted to Clarke and to us, and I found her to be extremely qualified and prepared to accept the role. Simply that.
Thanks.
Mhm.
So that was Craig and Carissa?
Yes,
Okay.
that's my motion.
And I believe there was a second.
There is a second.
That was a second.
Okay.
So now, if you would call for public comment, and then you could vote.
Okay. Any public comment?
Roll call.
Yes, please.
Patricia Trouth,
Aye.
Mark Truscott, yes. Andrew Bowden,
Aye.
David Allen Taylor Jr.
Aye.
4-0.
Playing the new card, did we address the Region 5 director?
We have
No.
not.
Question,
Yeah.
okay.
That is because we need to be on the conference call with Region 5, it would be, make that determination.
I see, okay.
Okay. Do we want to have any additional discussion or on Region 5 candidates?
Yeah.
The one candidate is from Hawaii, the other candidate is from, I believe, Washington, state of Washington.
I happen to know the candidate from Hawaii,
Okay.
Joe Kurokawa, and I would put forth his name for consideration. Knowing him personally, I think he would be very good. And looking at his qualifications, you know, he seems very able and qualified to represent Region 5.
I'd like to echo Andy's comments also.
And I've worked with Joel a little bit as well, and I concur.
Okay. Very good. Okay, so, let's see, so Andy and DJ, you'll be both participating in that call
Right.
in August. Okay.
But it sounds like.
We need a motion.
We need a
Legal
motion.
agreement's a decision.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, can I have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to place a vote for Joel Kurokawa on the call, representing this body.
I second.
Roll call?
Public
Oh,
comment?
excuse me, public comment? Okay.
Roll call. Patricia Trouth,
Aye.
Mark Truscott, yes. Andrew Bowden,
Aye.
David Allen Taylor Jr.
Aye.
4-0.
So then, moving on, then it sounds like, agenda item, oh, sorry, it looked like you had something to say about that, I'm sorry. So then moving on to agenda item I.5, this is review and possible action on Clarke resolution to approve draft model law and regulations. As I mentioned before, the draft model law and regulations will be considered for adoption at the September annual meeting. The model law was released by Clarke on March 23rd, and we brought it forth to, I apologize, I should call it the draft model law was released by Clarke on March 23rd, and we brought it forth to the committee at our meeting in April. Upon initial review, the committee opted to have more time to vet it. We had discussed at that time bringing it to the July meeting for further discussion. Pretty immediately after that meeting, we were notified, staff was notified that Clarke would be holding a webcast about the model law on May 31st, and that they were requesting comment by then. And so resultantly, we held a task force consisting of Patricia, DJ, Doug, and myself to kind of vet the model law and have comment ready for that webcast. Those comments that we determined are here in the cover page. The first finding was that a number of sections include mandates that some states don't require, like firm registration and CE, and so the recommendation was that those should be made as optional. Another recommendation was just to remove the word control from that sentence you see here, which is defining landscape architecture, because that presented a possible negative connotation, and that in defining various avenues for meetings, we suggested inclusion of teleconference. So the May 31st webcast was held. It seemed to be more of a factual, just this is an unveiling, and so there wasn't opportunity for that feedback, which is why we're including it today. And then subsequently, Clarke released a number of material for consideration at the annual meeting, including the resolution, which is before you today, some facts about the model law and regulations, and notably, in collecting this information for the meeting, we did uncover the model regulations, which we had not seen before. So that's the long synopsis of how we got to today. But the information before you, as I mentioned in your attachments, are the current for consideration draft model law and model regulations, the existing model law and model regulations for comparative purposes, the resolution, and then a summary of those two draft documents. What we're asking is for the committee to review this information and take possible action so we can present a vote possibly at the annual meeting.
And then just a side note, I'm actually on the task force for NCARB that's going through this same exercise, and it appears to be a much more extensive, deliberative process. We've had 4 meetings already. There are more scheduled. It's nowhere near coming to a vote of the membership. We just had our annual meeting, and so one option for LATC is to say, for us to convey to Clarke is what's the critical rush here when our sister organization has a different process going. I candidly don't understand the criticality of a vote taking place in September when we're not sure that this syncs up with what architects are doing. I will share that engineers don't have a model law, so I guess that makes life easier for us. But the whole bifurcation of the regulations part and the model law part was confusing to me in my world. Civics 101, law school 101, there's 3 bodies of law: common law, statutes, and regulations. So calling it model law and then all of a sudden having model regulations too, that's personally confusing to me. So it may be my responsibility for missing that, but my understanding of that terminology is such the model law should be your whole package of what governs what you do as a regulatory board, and it would include your statute and your regs. Be that as it may, we haven't done in-depth analysis on the regulatory piece, given that we just found out about it. So if there's a desire to ask Clarke for more time to review this before September, or if we need to develop another review process for us, that's an approach we could certainly look at.
Okay. So I guess I'd like legal to, just give us a little background. Is it pretty standard to have like a model law and then also have regulations? Because it is kind of confusing. And so I'm just wondering if that's a standard type of procedure, that you would have a law and then you also have regulations that go with it.
That just is going to vary according to organization. I think Doug's more speaking to this aspect of you've got NCARB doing one thing and Clarke doing another. That's not necessarily in the legal world something that's, I don't think he's speaking to something in the legal world per se.
I'm speaking.
There's different categories
I
of
won't
law,
call it legal because
sure.
I'm not an attorney, but I'll call it labeling. By calling one part of it law and the other part of something else, it suggests that the regulatory part isn't law somehow, which is not the case. So it was confusing, I think, to the constituencies as to what we're talking about here. Because for NCARB, double check that there's model law, and then there's the statutes, and then there's the regs. So anyway, either way, we just uncovered the fact that there's a separate component called regulations, and we need a review process.
And is that
at the LATC level?
Is that included here?
No, it's a separate attachment because, again, we just found out about it. So it's in your red folder and then copies for the public if people don't have it. Right, Tremaine?
Yes.
So, for Andy.
I guess I talked too long.
the meeting will reconvene at 11:11.
Excuse me. Are we on right now?
Let's see, just kind of reiterating where we stopped. Doug, you were commenting on the regulations. Did you have anything else that you wanted to say?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to suggest is that we take about another, we'll say, 8 minutes to kind of look at the model regulations. You know, it's 12 pages. Many of us have already been kind of looking at it, so we'll get started here in a few more minutes. Unless the committee members are ready to discuss.
Honestly, I think I need more than 12 minutes
Yeah.
to review this.
Okay.
Because I'd like to review it in context to the law, and unfortunately it feels very rushed. So I would prefer to push off this discussion. I realize that we have a Clarke meeting coming up, but this seems unfortunate, them dropping this into our laps and expecting action. So I welcome any other comments from committee members.
Yeah, actually, Rebecca had a thought, if I may, that this might really underscore the value in telling Clarke, we'll slow down a little bit, guys. The good news for us is it's July and the meeting's not till September. But whatever the will of the committee is.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Yes.
And this is for Brianna. Did we ever get anything back from the comments that we had worked on initially? Did we get a response on it? Because I don't see that anything that we put forth was addressed.
We had them ready for the webcast, but I don't know if you listened to the webcast. Our perception of it was very informational and not interactive. And so we had them ready to go, but it was an unveiling, and that's it. Thank you very much. And so we held on to it, waiting to see what the rest of the committee's thoughts are and how we want to kind of, for what Rebecca said, how we want to broach it.
So they were never like emailed to them or anything?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing Clarke had mentioned was that a survey was going to come out, so that was one thing we waited for and never saw that. So.
Well, I think that's all the more reason to continue this.
Andy, do you have any comments?
Well, my only concern that I would have in delaying anything on this is they are expecting us to vote on it. So, I mean, with all due respect, I know, it may seem rushed, but we have supposedly had information for a while. I've read through what they had previously given us, the new model, or the draft model regulations are kind of new, but it is only 12 pages. Looking through it, I don't see anything in here that is that much different, other than the one item is the approved education programs at 302.11. But if you'd rather postpone discussion on it, that's fine.
So I have to agree with Andy. I think that, the expectation is that we are going to be providing them feedback in August. And the reason why I moved this whole Clarke section up in the agenda is because I felt in particular Section 302.11, approved education, could be beneficial to the committee and also to the public as we discuss some of the other agenda items. So if we don't want to approve it, we can table it, but I would appreciate it if as a minimum, if you would review Section 302.11.
That's on page 9 of the draft model regulations.
Superintendent,
Yes.
what One approach might be to officially communicate in writing the issues identified by our working group, those 3 points that are on your cover page. And then a couple different ways the regulatory piece could be addressed. It could be a piece of the letter, or it could be we need a little bit more time on the regs, we'll get back to you. There's a couple different approaches you can take. But either way, I would recommend that the letter happen after this meeting, and it may want to raise the issue of why are we so many steps in front of that comment? What's the critical need to be so far down the path?
May I make a
yes,
comment?
certainly.
Doug, I'm a little confused as to why this particular document and our approval of it would be based on what NCARB is doing. It's a completely different, I mean, granted, that's the architects and we are under CAB,
Right.
but that is different and separate from Clarke.
Correct, I understand that. Related professions, related regulatory systems, developed at some level based upon work done by the Federation of Licensing Boards, FARB. I just don't see the wisdom in not being synced up a little bit better than we are. We seem completely separate and independent, and
But just as a,
I'm not sure that's
just
an
as
advantage.
Just as a thought, if the tables were turned and, let's say, NCARB was behind us, or behind Clarke in this, would NCARB hold off making a decision on their regulations until we finish doing ours?
I would hope so, if it makes sense.
Oh, okay, I thought for sure you'd say no, but okay.
Okay, I'd just like to table this agenda item to introduce Jeffrey Mason.
You get to do that, you could finish up.
Yes, it could go on for
We're gonna be here for a while.
I might learn something. Thanks for the invitation. Jeffrey Mason with the department. What's my silly title? Chief Deputy Director. Wanted to come here today and give you guys a few updates for the department. The most important one, who is not here because he's being pulled forward directions. The governor, about 4 months ago, appointed a new director for the department. As you remember, Alwat Gadani had been the director. He went into the private sector. So Dean Grafilo was appointed by the governor. Dean comes from a great background working in the legislature of the Capitol. Previous to that, with a few trade groups, et cetera. So he's been a great addition. We've found him, while he's new to DCA, he's not new to policy, he's not new to the Capitol, and he's not new to politics. What's been great about Dean is he is one of these people who ask a ton of questions, and 95% are really good ones. So, and he's a really good listener. So it's been really great to have a different perspective on the team and moving forward. So, like I said, Dean got pulled downtown to the Capitol. It's that time of the year downtown, so yeah, so he apologizes. A few of the things that we've been working on. The department, after a few incidents that happened a while ago, have made a formal policy that no part of the Department of Consumer Affairs will work with federal entities on law enforcement activities, unless it's been pre-approved. And what that specifically speaks to is simply the departments like immigration, et cetera. So we will not be sharing our information with the federal government. We will not be participating in any enforcement sweeps or stings that they initiate. We, of course, at times do partner with the federal government on the FBI and other entities on our activities. But anything outside of that, the policy is pretty explicit that we will not be engaging in those type of activities, especially on the immigration side of the house. A few other things, we are entering the time period here until the end of 1st September when the Capitol is in its deadline mode. So they will be going out on break here next week, I believe it is, for a month. They come back the end of August, and we'll have a mad rush to get all bills done before they then move. They go away for the rest of the year and come back in January. So I'm not sure if you guys have much legislation that's pending out there. We have a few department-wide statewide, we have a few important boards and bureaus that have sunset bills, which are always important, medical board, nursing board, the LVN board, to speak of a few. So we're monitoring those and watching those. We are also in the beginning period for budget proposals for the 2018-19 fiscal year. We're always working way ahead. The governor is already beginning to make commentary that mentions that any increases in staffing for any part of consumer affairs, much less any part of state government, will be examined very, very closely. As you know, our governor is wonderful, frugal, and very careful about adding to the state workforce. So if this committee has needs to add staff, I'm sure we're already working on those concept papers going forward. It's also going to be, if you think about it, a year from next January, we'll have a new governor. So that always brings incredible change. And we anticipate with that over the next year, year and a half, we're going to see a lot of change in the department and throughout state government as people begin to look for next horizons. So those are kind of our basic updates. I don't know if folks have questions for the department, for us at all.
I just have,
Yes.
I'm interested in the approval for sharing information with the federal government. What is that process? You mentioned we won't be doing it without approval. Does that come from the governor? Is that...
Well, the approval really would be more for actual activities. The legislature is already beginning to weigh in pretty heavily that we simply will not be sharing. And most of our information that is public anyway, that's, you know, name, business license, address, et cetera. What we don't collect and what has been a concern is immigration status,
right.
Those type of things. We don't really collect that information, but there's a lot of information out there that one might be able to data mine, cherry pick to determine those things. So what's not public information would require a Public Records Request Act, and the legislature, as I said, is already pretty weighing pretty heavily on those types of things. We expect legislation to be signed here coming up very shortly that will limit even more strictly. But as far as all the actual activities, anything outside of our normal working with FBI, et cetera, and other entities, especially when they come to us, that those are the ones that we would want to have a further examination of. So, yeah. Any questions? Well, I appreciate the time. And
thank you.
I apologize for the interruption and a little lateness. I hear you guys had a fire alarm, so yeah. So,
Quite excited.
yeah, we do this occasionally. So yeah, enjoy your day here today.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yes.
Okay, so, let's see, Andy and Doug.
As we were saying, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Well, you know, I guess my concern is, you know, we were asking Clarke, you know, when is this, if you want us to use this information, when is it coming out? So I feel like we were asking them to, you know, produce this in a timely manner. And, you know, I guess I'm a little concerned that then we kind of turn it around and say, well, you know, we're going to table this until our next quarterly meeting. So, you know, is it possible to discuss that one item within these, within the regulations? Because it does relate to other agenda items that we have that we're going to be talking about a little later.
Yeah, that's the will of the committee.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
May I suggest that we
Yeah.
also look at, on the draft model regulations 302.12, experience supervision requirements as well?
Okay.
Because both 302.11, approved education programs, and 302.12, experience supervision requirements, both kind of pertain to further discussion items
Right.
on our
Okay.
agenda.
So I just have questions. When this document made available to the committee? The model regulation part.
We provided this to the committee yesterday.
So
but we've only just received.
Chair, you consider this is adequate time?
Well, I read the whole thing last night, so I feel comfortable, but I can certainly appreciate if other members of the committee are not comfortable. But as I mentioned before, I would like to at least take a couple of the sections and, have people review them because, yeah, they do impact our discussions that we'll be having shortly. So,
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I did not get a chance to read this last night.
Okay.
So this is very fresh.
Okay.
So I'm going to abstain from everything as regards to this.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Do you feel comfortable reading it right now, those three sections?
No.
No? Okay. Then, I guess we'll just take a second to, DJ, where do you stand on this?
Well, this is fresh to me too. I didn't have this information
Okay.
until today.
Okay.
I'm okay with perhaps discussing the sections brought up, but I'm not comfortable in approving these documents.
Yeah. No, I'm
And
not.
just a quick question.
Yeah.
Are we taking the model law and the model regulations as separate documents? Or is this
In our
one
discussion.
item altogether? Yes.
Well, we can pretty much table this. I just want the information, I want the committee to be aware of this information so that as we move through the agenda items, they're aware of this information. That's basically it, so that you have a complete picture. So that's what I'm suggesting. And, with that, then I think that, we can move on and look at the next agenda item. So we'll be tabling any kind of formalized approval of both the model law and the model regulations.
I think if the committee wanted to, you could, on the model law piece, maybe consider what your working group identified, and then direct staff to prepare a formal letter on that piece. So that's an option. You could finalize that work, and then you could task your working group with going back, looking through the regulations, and seeing if there are any major issues that we need to figure out a solution for. And a solution might be tell Clarke we need more time. It could be we need a special conference call of the entire body. There's a number of different paths, but we probably should do something formally and officially on at least what Clarke calls the model law part, the statutory part. I would definitely suggest that.
Okay, so how do the other board members feel about how to kind of?
I agree.
Yeah,
I
okay.
support that.
Okay, to write a letter, DJ?
Yeah, I would agree. I think we need to make the comments known that we had worked on in our.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
In our subcommittee.
I'd
Yeah.
like to formalize those and get those to Clarke.
Okay,
So do we need that as a form of a motion?
I believe we do.
Yes.
I'd like to move that we write a letter to Clarke, and we point out the items that are specified on items 1, 2, and 3 as comments about the draft model law, and that those be sent to Clarke for possible consideration for revision to their draft model law.
I'll second that.
Would the public like to comment?
Yeah, I only have so many opportunities to speak to you. So I would just say that in looking at the approved education programs, I would say they look a little bit light on the experience. They don't jive with the state of California's current requirements, which are a total of 6 years, and they certainly don't jive with the architect's requirements, which are 8 years. So I would not support adopting this as is. I also think an experience-only pathway should be added to the model law if it were to be adopted in California. And then lastly, I would just quickly mention that this document requires continuing education experience, which is not currently a requirement in California. I think it's a good idea, but it's something to consider, especially especially regarding the length. Thank you.
Yeah, and that was in our comments earlier.
Madam
Andy?
Chair?
Yeah.
My motion was strictly on writing a letter to Clarke based on items 1, 2, and 3 of the draft model law itself.
Yeah, okay.
Not regarding the approved education programs or the experience. So it's just on those particular items.
So noted. Okay, any other comments from the public?
I was just hoping that those comments of mine would be added to your letter, if they were missing.
We've heard your comments, and we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, then, say
call?
roll call.
Patricia Trouth,
Aye.
Mark Truscott, aye. Andrew Bowden,
Aye.
David Allen Taylor Jr.
Aye.
4-0.
Okay. We will move forward on, yes, the program manager's report.
Did you want to cover I.6?
Oh,
Finishing up that?
yeah, okay, yeah, let's finish up Barb. So agenda item 6 is discuss impossible action on strategic plan objective to consider advocating for Clarke to institute an internship experience-based program to allow applicants participation in the licensure process early and provide a more comprehensive experience component. Okay, so, Brianna, do you want to add anything, or?
I think Doug was going to present this.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So this is an item from the strategic plan, and quite often we compare our licensure requirements to requirements for other related professions, engineering, architecture, land surveying, et cetera. And one major difference between architecture and landscape architecture is there's no structured experience component for landscape architecture. Conversely, at the national level for architects, there's a requirement which is maintained via NCARB, the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards. It recently was renamed and is now called the Architectural Experience Program. Previously, it was the Intern Development Program. And in a nutshell, what it does is identify, based upon psychometric survey data, the critical areas of practice in which an intern needs to gain practical experience in order to become prepared to test and eventually, hopefully, become licensed and practice in a manner that protects the public. The board has had this requirement since 2005. There is a fee associated with it. It is literally administered via the national group. We do not have a direct role in managing or administering the program at any level. We do vote on changes to it at the national level because it is an NCARB program, so much like Clarke, we have one vote among the 54 different members of NCARB. It has evolved in a very positive way recently to try to be reflective of the generation coming into the profession. So for example, there's now an app that's available, Android and iPhone version, where you can literally track your hours on your phone. So when an intern logs a long day of work on construction documents of some sort, she can just get her phone and go boom, and the hours are logged. And then her supervisor gets pinged with an email, and the architect supervisor has to validate those hours. We can go into a lot more detail if you wish. Marcus Reinhardt, our licensing manager for the board, is here. If you really want to get into the nuts and bolts of how the program works, we have included in your packet the program guidelines directly from NCARB. There is very robust content on NCARB's website, including videos on how AXP works. And I also do know for a fact that NCARB, at least I informally inquired, and the CEO would be interested in having a dialogue with Clarke informally or however about the possibility of Clarke considering establishing such a requirement at some point.
Okay. This is, this is a huge issue. I have to say I was very impressed with what was in our packet, far as the program guidelines. And I'd like to open up for discussion. I have, my thoughts, but I'd like to hear from other people regarding this. Any comments?
Sure. I was going to let someone else speak first. But I am a real supporter of this. I think that it'll add, it adds a lot to preparing individuals for sitting for the exams. It helps inform LAAB and the schools that teach landscape architecture about areas that need to be enhanced within curriculums. I think there are a lot of benefits to it, and I'd love to see us move this direction. I think it also enhances the concept of experience-only an experience-only pathway to licensure if we have a real nice structured program for internship to prepare individuals.
Yeah, I think the structure is great. I don't see any downside to this. I would concur with Mark's comments.
Okay.
I have a question that hopefully you might be able to answer this, but can a candidate have a path to licensure, experience-only path to licensure without participating in the AXP?
Not anymore. A new candidate has to participate in AXP.
All right, so from what I understand then, so in order for, on the architecture program in CAD, that a candidate can only get a path to licensure if they go through the AXP program, which currently LATC does not have.
Correct, unless they're somehow exempt, and there's different ways they can be exempt. But in general, a brand new candidate applying for eligibility today is going to have to do AXP.
Okay. Right, thank you.
Okay, so I guess what I would propose that the committee do is to write a letter to Clarke, asking them to consider a program such as this. And I'd like to get feedback again from the committee on how they feel about it.
I would support that, absolutely.
I support that, and I support the letter encouraging Clarke to talk to NCARB about maybe royalties or somehow having them involved in modifying their program to fit ours, so we're not starting from ground zero. They've spent a lot of time and effort, and I see it as an opportunity for Clarke to enhance what they offer to landscape architects, candidates, and licensees by having this program in their house. So I totally agree with that.
Okay. DJ?
Yeah, I'm in support of what's been discussed.
Okay. Okay.
We don't have a public comment.
Yes, public comment, please.
I know that when the American Society of Landscape Architects established their Emerging Professionals program, there really wasn't a very good pathway. In other words, there was no organization for it. I think this program would be a great way for a group like ASLA to embrace how a person, is seeing the value of licensure. Because from what we've been told by other LATC board members, a lot of the universities don't stress that much. And I think what a great way to then get that pathway going and have it work within that emerging professionals structure that ASLA has established or is trying to establish. So thank you.
I'm in agreement. I think that the AXP program is incredibly comprehensive, and what I particularly like about it is how general the 96 criteria are, and they apply to the profession as a whole. With the profession as broad as ours, we need to keep things general so we can encompass everyone. My only concern is the implementation of a program like this, and I think we should do like the architects did, which is, I think there was like 3 steps of different years and how it was implemented. And then I would have concerns about how it would be implemented retroactively with people's experience, but I'm in full support.
There's obviously a lot of things that need to be worked out, but I think, You know, California's always taken a leadership position. We were the first state in the country to license landscape architects, and I think it would be real appropriate for us to write the letter. So, okay, can we have a motion to write this letter to Clarke?
I'll make the motion. I make a motion that we, as LATC, write a letter to Clarke asking them to consider a similar type of internship program similar to what NCARB has, and that they contact NCARB for some guidance in communication for being able to use their model as a model to base our new internship program on.
I'll second.
Well,
Public comment?
public comment, excuse me. Any additional comments?
Roll call. Patricia Trouth.
Aye.
Mark Truscott, aye. Andrew Bowden.
Aye.
David Allen Taylor Jr.
Aye.
4-0.
Okay. So,
Program managers.
yes, okay, so program management. Agenda item F.
All right. What you see here to encapsulate the program management report is the June iteration of the monthly report. That, of course, has information on the board as well as the LATC. On page 10 of that monthly report begins the rundown on the LATC. And so what I'll do is I'll hit what I believe are some high-level points. If you have a question, please feel free to stop me. The first up is personnel. We have recruitment efforts underway to fill the licensing coordinator position that became vacant when we promoted Stacy Townsend to the enforcement analyst. So Stacy has been a great support in the interim, helping us in both capacities, but we're certainly looking to fill it. We have applications in and hope to begin interviewing soon. At that point, we will have full staff. I want to touch on legislation as well. We have SB 800, which is the Business and Professions Committee bill. That one, if the committee recalls, addresses, this bill, among many other amendments for other boards and bureaus, I believe, addresses our Business and Profession Code sections 5680.1 and 5680.2. Those are with regard to licenses which have expired for more than 5 years. Licensees would then have to renew their application process for relicensure altogether. So the status as of early this week for this bill is that it passed the Senate unanimously in May and then went to the Assembly for reading. At that time, it went back to Business and Professions Committee, and from there, it doesn't appear that any further action has commenced on the bill. Should it pass, however, that would then necessitate us to pursue repealing CCR sections 2624 and 2624.1 as they would no longer be necessary. So that one will be wait and see, but the good news is it's possibly in motion. A regulatory proposal I wanted to touch on is on page 15. CCR section 2649 on fees. Again, as you all might recall, this one we had reduced our renewal fees from $400 to $220 for 2 years to address our funds in reserve. That regulation, that fee reduction rather, would have expired on June 30th, and so we had a regulatory proposal to extend that. The good news is that it was approved, and the extension of the fee reduction became effective July 1st, and that will continue on until, June 30th of 2019. So that was great news there. For our strategic plan, for the new strategic plan, I wanted to report that it went before the board meeting, before the board at its meeting on June 15th. At our April meeting, the committee voted to recommend approval of the strategic plan, and so the board went ahead and approved it. So we're working on formatting and posting it to the website. And today we have, I believe, 1 or 2 objectives from that plan, and we look forward to tackling it further. Last but certainly not least, there is the enforcement program report, but I'm actually seeking to kind of table discussion of that as we have the disciplinary guidelines here for the committee's review today, as well as we have several enforcement statistics to review, and this will be under agenda item J. So, any questions about this monthly report, items maybe I didn't touch on?
Well, I only had one question that, in regards of the passing rate for the CSE this year at 51%. Do we have any indicators why it was so low as compared to the year before? It was over 72%.
Courtney, you might be able to speak on it.
It's because of the low volume of test takers.
Okay.
Yeah, we spoke to the Office of Professional Exam Services about it, and they warned us that it's nothing to be worried about.
Okay, we just had a few candidates, unfortunately, so.
They suggested that if it continues over a period, I think he said 5 years or so, then it would be something to worry about. But
Okay.
right now, it's pretty normal.
Thank you.
The second attachment encapsulated under the PM report section is the California Architect Board meeting notice from its June 15th meeting. Andy, you were there. You were a witness to it. But just the LATC items that went before the board were, we provided an update on the April 18th meeting. We provided the reciprocity proposal that came from the April 18th meeting, and given its agenda item G and H, I'll go into that in more detail then, unless you would like me to now. And then, as mentioned, the strategic plan went before the board, and then we also provided the board an update on SB 800. So, was there anything else you wanted to touch on for that? No. Okay. Any questions about the agenda?
Okay. Let's see, so we'll move on to agenda item G.
Madam Chair, may I make a recommendation that we break for lunch before we get into this matter?
Oh, we have lunch here.
Do we have lunch? All right, okay, yeah.
Well, we have a,
excuse
Your
me.
last item, or almost last item, on where you're going to be in November, do you have a location yet in San Diego?
No.
No?
It's only that the meeting will be in San Diego.
Okay, let me know if you need some help.
Oh, okay.
Okay, meeting is adjourned at 12:50?
I think you're just taking recess.
A recess,
Oh, okay.
excuse me,
No problem.
1 o'clock. That's kind of what
Recess.
we need that.
11:50.
11,
12:30.
12:30. Okay, we'll
that's fine.
reconvene at 12:30.
okay. Just think about.
Okay, the LATC will reconvene at 1:31. So we're on agenda item G. Discuss and possible action on strategic plan objectives to review Title 16 California Code of Regulations, CCR, Section 2620, education and training credits regarding initial licensure eligibility for individuals who have related degrees and/or experience only, to expand pathways to licensure.
So, for this item, it's my understanding that the previous strategic plan, and then certainly the current strategic plan, had objectives regarding CCR 2620 and expanding the pathways to licensure with regard to related degrees. Specifically in this strategic plan, this current one that was just approved, the objective is to, quote, review CCR section 2620 to expand credit for education experience to include degrees in related areas of study. Prior to 1997, the LATC granted credit for bachelor's well, really for any bachelor's or associate's degree. After 1997, of course, that changed. And so if the LATC will still allow me to do, it's a rather lengthy opening document. I would like to fast forward to kind of where we're at this year and start my recap there. Beginning in January, it's my understanding that the committee, upon reviewing this strategic plan objective to look at related degrees, directed staff to hold public forums to gather more information. So we held a public forum in March here in Sacramento, and then another, of course, at our meeting in Pomona on April 18th. All comments received from both of those forums are included in your attachments in this section. At April 18th, because of time restrictions, we didn't have, the committee didn't have time to continue a discussion and had determined that today would be that time to continue the discussion about related degrees and the comments received during the public forum. Another part of the story is at the June 15th board meeting, the LATC brought forward for the board's consideration the proposal for reciprocity licensure, and upon review of the reciprocity proposal, the board expressed the desire to have LATC's initial and reciprocal licensure requirements closely aligned with one another, and then in addition, where possible, mirror those which the board has. So the board directed at today's meeting the LATC to develop a proposal that addresses, again, having the reciprocal and initial licensure qualifications aligned, and then also aligning them with those of the board. So in response to that request, what we have prepared is what you have as attachment G6. This is for the committee's consideration and for the discussion of today. It's proposed amendments to 2620. In doing so, we referenced the board's table of equivalents. So for information on the board's table and their requirements, that the G6 has a column there that provides more easy reference to what the board does, but then of course the board's entire table of equivalents is attachment 7 here in this document. So what we're providing is a proposed, I don't want to say overhaul, but a large amendments to 2620, in part to create an experience-only pathway, which the board has, and then giving credit for related and non-related degrees. So as an overview of what you have as resources for this, of course the Clarke regulations that you mentioned earlier, attachments in this section include the subcommittee's report, degrees accepted by Clarke, comments received, both written and oral comments, and then we have, as I mentioned, G6, our proposed amendments to the regulation of 2620, and then attachment 7 is what the board has. So referencing all that, what we're asking the committee to do is review this information provided and make a recommendation for the board's consideration.
Okay. Thank you, Brianna. Okay, so I'd like to open it up for discussion. Can I get some clarification on when I'm supposed to get comments from the public? Is that?
My understanding is after a motion has been made.
Just after the motion has been made. Is that good? Okay. Okay. So, I'm going to open it up for discussion. I prefer to not be the first one talking. So, Andy, do you want to make some comments?
I'd like to withhold my comments right for the moment. I'd like to hear what the other members have to say.
Okay, I'll get started. I think it's high time that we adjust our requirements for sitting for the exams. The demand is high for our landscape architects in the state of California. Per the recent information we received from staff, 38% of current active landscape architects are in retirement age. My own experience as an educator at UC Davis 40 to 50% of my students, graduating seniors, come from other countries. The UC system is bringing a lot of international students in, and so the connection there is that unfortunately it's difficult for them to find jobs when they graduate because of immigration laws and work laws and visa laws. So they move on. So there too, there's a concern. Also, our profession is one that people find later in their lives. And it's very impossible for those who are more mature and have started to establish their life to go back to school, quite frankly. I really believe that we need to have pathways and options for them to enter into the profession of landscape architecture and to become licensed without having to go back to school. I believe in the experience training. I think that's critical. I'm very excited about the potential for an AXP style training program for mentoring and preparing candidates. And what we're doing here is we're allowing candidates, we're preparing and adjusting the regulations to allow candidates to sit for a very grueling LARE and, per our numbers, a very grueling CSE. We're not giving licenses away to people. We're simply allowing them to sit for these exams. So I think it's time to make these changes.
I tend to agree with Mark Truscott on this. I feel like over the years, while we think we're maybe trying to open up the profession, we're actually, in some ways, in my opinion, becoming more prescriptive. And it's really getting hard in this day and age to see where everybody might be coming from to this profession. As Mark stated, the LARE is no memorization example. It's not a spelling bee. It's grueling. You've got to know what you're doing, and that's the point that we vet these exams to make sure that the people who are sitting for them, we're testing their KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities. I think you come from any line of work or any line of education with the right amount of experience, sit for the exam and pass it, and having done so, you've proven that you've gotten the education through experience that you need to be a licensed individual, a licensed landscape architect. So, yeah, that's where I sit on that.
So the edits is largely developed by staff in concert with the committees, or what is the?
The edits were developed by staff, yes.
We took the boards as a guide, and then we looked at what the other states require, and then we looked at the model reg.
So I assume there are many discussions proceeding to this meetings related to the edits.
Yeah, we've been
So
discussing
along the
this.
way, I think the board and the staff is on the same page.
And also, this will come back to the board,
Again.
because the Practice Act requires that the board approve or ratify all of LATC's regulatory action and any disciplinary actions after this.
Do you want me to go, or do you
No,
want
I can go.
Okay.
While I don't disagree that there are times when things need to be overhauled, I think there needs to be a clear reason as to why you do it. And I'm not sure that there is a clear reason right at the moment. The regulation was changed in 1997, and for 20 years it served us well. I think that there are some parts of the current regulation that still pertain, and we can go through them point by point if we wanted to, but I think education is very important, and while I think that you can have an experience-only pathway. I think, though, the experience-only pathway needs to have a monitoring system attached to it, just like the architects have the AXP program. But there is no AXP program for landscape architects at the moment. So I'm not sure that, you know, we could say that we would, that we could initiate an experience-only pathway and then not have any way of being able to monitor what they're learning in that period of time. I think education is critical. It's a critical part of the overall process, and it helps protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public, and that's really the only reason why we exist as a committee. And I don't think that we'd be protecting the public by adopting this as it's presented today.
So Andy, you think the edits, as a result of edits, while eliminating the education requirements?
I believe that by saying that you'll accept any degree regardless, which is what this is basically saying, and having experience only, I think that takes away a major component of what it is that we do as landscape architects. That's my belief.
I'd like to speak. I think that education is critical, and I think that most people that want to get licensed, whether they're an architect, a civil engineer, an attorney, or landscape architect, I think the route that they typically take is to get educated in a formal setting. But I do think education's changing. You know, I have two two teenagers, and they learn very differently today. And I think that we need to recognize that people are learning in different ways. I think the whole internet is just it's an explosion of information, and it is flavoring a college education. I mean, in a lot of respects, you have a lot of young people that are getting a degree, and they're not anywhere near a college or a university. So, I think that the education element is very important, but I do think that we need to have different pathways to get licensed. And and I have to commend the staff for doing this, because I've asked a couple times, what happened in 1997 that all of a sudden, our education requirements changed dramatically? And, I was practicing, so it wasn't like there was some kind of major thing that happened that, was the impetus for this type of change. I understand what we have in place has served us well for 20 years, but I think what we had in place prior served us quite well for, we started our licensure back in the 50s. So, I think I'm glad to see that we're discussing this, because, I think that, I think that we, number one, need to recognize what the Architects Board has, directed us to do. And then the other thing, in reading through this, when we went through the sunset process in 2004, we were kind of directed to start to look at this, and I think that was the impetus for the Education Committee at that time. You would probably know more about that than I do, but...
Well, if I can interject just for a second.
Sure.
I can tell you what happened in 1997.
Okay.
And that was the Board of Landscape Architects was sunsetted.
Okay.
And that was the impetus for why the change happened. The joint legislative sunset review happened, and they were very critical as to some of the pathways, I think, that the Landscape Architect Program had, the Board of Landscape Architects. So when we became the LATC under CAB, everything had to be restructured at that time. And it was in a direct response to the joint sunset legislative review. I might not have said that quite correctly. Anyway, but that was the reason why it changed.
Okay.
In 2004, the Education Subcommittee, I believe, was formed. That's prior to my time being on the committee. I came on the committee just as the report was being finalized. It had already been through, it had already gone to the board for approval. They came back with, I think, a small modification, and then it got approved at that time in 2007. So, and that's when I started. But a lot of time and effort went into that study. Mm-hmm. And so a question that I think we would need to ask ourselves is, what's changed between the time that study was done in 2007 that got approved and today? And I'm not sure the marketplace has changed. I'm not sure that there's been enough changes going on in either the economy or the needs of the public. And again, keep in mind, we're not trying to protect landscape architects. We're not trying to protect the profession. Our job is to protect the public. Mm-hmm. So I guess from a public protection standpoint, one has to take a look at this and say, okay, well, all this data that we have that was prepared prior, are we just discounting all of that and just saying, well, okay, all this work that had been done, all the research that had been done, you know, when you start going through different appendixes and they start talking about all the, the Office of Examination Resources, and I mean, all the different things that they went through in order to create this, the Thompson Prometric National Task Analysis. I mean, these are things that, as a committee, we don't really get involved with, but yet that's what our subcommittee had done, and that they taken all that into consideration and came up with some recommendations. And in those recommendations, they had some things that were spelled out that never got implemented. They were approved. The LETC approved it, the board approved it, but they just never got implemented. Part of it, I think, is because we never got the tracking system up and going. It was the ATS at first. I mean, one of the things is, how can you as a committee be making decisions when you don't have data? So we don't have data because we don't have the ATS. I mean, the ATS system was never really effective for us. We've been waiting for Breeze to come online, and we're still waiting. I've been on this committee now for 10 years. I've never had one report that has told us any of the information that was being asked for in that subcommittee report. So I'm not trying to be critical as to the way things have happened. It's just, I mean, it is what it is. But we're making some very large determinations right now on no data, really. We have no scientific data to back up some of the stuff. We're just reacting and saying, well, because we have some people that, you know, is affected because of reciprocity requirements, and we tried to address that, and unfortunately the board disagreed with us on that. But I guess the one of the things you'd have to ask yourself, is there really a problem? Is there an issue? And if there is an issue, you know, how many people is this affecting?
Okay, well, I don't necessarily agree with you on, you know, if it's only affecting a couple people, that it's not something we should address. But the bigger picture is, and the reason why I wanted to change the agenda today was because of what Clarke is proposing. And if you look at Clarke, the regulations, you know, they have in there, I'll just read it. In the little matrix, they're saying, the last line, that the educational equivalency, they would allow any bachelor's degree, and they would give it a maximum of 2 years. So if we're moving in the direction of supporting Clarke and their model law and their model regulations, why aren't we supporting this?
I don't think we are saying that we support that.
Okay.
We're going to discuss it and then didn't. It's been tabled, so. Andy, I just have an observation. Since I'm observer, so
Sure.
Because it makes observations. So look at the 15 entries here, that the edits. more than 10 are about education. So I take a slightly different approach. I think this edits actually recognize the importance of education. It's not undermines education. But I think what your concern is some specific course only offered by an accredited degree of landscape architecture is so critical they cannot be missed. I'm trying to interpret your argument. But I would caution you as a practitioner that in order to really modernize landscape architecture practice, we can even visit our core courses, how relevant they are. Give you an example. In recent years, whenever I have a low impact design, impact project, I'm not just a high landscape architect. I always back up with the civil engineers. They're coming as a peer to address low impact development and prove to be very successful. They really complement each other. And if you just have a civil engineers, a bunch of permeable pavers. But if you just have Patricia, you probably have just a bunch of beautiful grasses. But put them two together, really address the problem that I need to meet MS4, which is now we're talking about public welfare and safety. So I just, as an observer, I just want to caution you to think about that this seems to accept a much more broad and education background, come to the industry, could be enhancement. So that's my observation.
Can we clarify, Andy, what data you indicated wasn't provided? Because I've done some research and maybe I might have some information on that. Is it number 4 on the recommendations from the Education Subcommittee? Or is it something else?
Can I comment on, when you all sent out that 325-page document yesterday, it's on page 82 of that document. It talks about a tracking system and a tracking chart for reciprocity.
Okay.
And, which I've never, ever seen, and I think Andy's saying this never was implemented.
Well, it's like we don't know, take for example, on the pass rates, we don't know what schools, where somebody's going to school. We don't know, when we start saying things like the California pass rate is lower than the national average, we have no way of being able to understand why that is. And whether or not it's education is a problem. I mean, 5-6 years ago, we made a point of going to every single school and having our LETC meetings at the school so that we could talk to faculty and find out how many of them were actually licensed.
Well, if it's like what you've indicated, number 4, we do have that chart. Staff had done the 100 candidates or licensees that it had recommended. And then it came, I went back in the minutes, it came to the committee, and the committee, we wanted to make sure the headings that we were capturing were the right categories because it was tracking where they went to school, what kind of degree, what year they got the degree, whether or not they had landscape architecture experience or civil engineering or architecture or licensed contractor experience. And then it tracked each division, how many attempts they took on each division. And we gave the headings to the committee, and they reviewed it. They didn't have any changes on it according to the minutes. And they asked staff to submit it to the subcommittee, the education subcommittee. And in number 4, it does say that the subcommittee reviewed it. They reviewed the data that we had collected, and they asked that it just be continued on an ongoing basis. So I think it came to a point where, well, we've got all this information. Is it really going to be helpful if you keep adding more and more candidates to it? But I think what it showed, and I think originally it stemmed from a sunset review issue about the pass rates compared to the national pass rates, and it wanted to know the reasoning why. And so after we collected that data and the education subcommittee reviewed it and they asked that we continue it ongoing and see if it even helped, Then the response to that sunset review issue was drafted, and it was included in the, I think, the 2010 sunset review report. And then it just kind of, okay, we got the information. But I think what the data showed, and I was skimming through it last night trying to see, does it really show anything? It was kind of like all over the place. I mean, it had all different kinds of degrees and people that took it, the divisions multiple times. And I think it's hard to use that as a basis because there are so many variables and so many components of it to have that drive a certain decision, what's before you today. So I think when the subcommittee reviewed it and the LETC at the time, I think they realized, this is all over the place, what is it really going to show us? The other thing that I think is important to note, and Courtney, speak up if I say something incorrect. Right now, in your current regulations, you can have at a minimum an associate's degree and then the rest experience. And that experience is not structured. That's like the bare minimum, correct? So right now, you already have a majority of the requirement where it can be experience component of it. So, I mean, that's something to think about. It's only, making another adjustment to that where you're allowing that portion of time that goes towards the AA degree to go towards experience. And it's not structured right now, so.
No, but I think that, number one, it's got to be a degree in landscape architecture, a 2-year community college degree in landscape architecture. That's what we allow for. Mm-hmm. We give 1 year of credit for that.
And the rest can be experience.
The rest is experience, of which out of that 5 years experience, I think at least a minimum of 1 year has to be under a landscape architect.
Right.
So there is
some structure to it, but I mean that's a big difference from an accredited landscape architecture degree and then a little bit of it experience.
Right, but the point being is that you're gaining some education. They're getting a 2-year degree and we're giving them 1 year credit for it, but they are getting some education credit.
Right.
So that's all we're saying, and that's all it's ever been, is that a minimum of 1 credit in education is required to be able to qualify to sit for the LARE in California. That's all we're saying. So because I feel that education is important. And to Tien, to your point, just so you know, California and I think Nevada are the only 2 states in the entire nation that give credit for associate degrees. And California is the only state in the nation that gives credit for the extension programs. No other state has that. So we have these other pathways that we've created that allow for that. So the only thing that we don't have is the experience-only pathway, which I'm in support of, but I'm in support of it once we have a way of being able to track it or track the knowledge base for it.
Well, it could be one way, it could be all of it under the direct supervision of a licensed landscape architect. That could be, and I think that's how, in the proposal, how it's written. So the whole, 6 years could be under the direct supervision of a licensee.
But let's take that for an example, just as an example. Let's say all 6 years is under a landscape architect who's doing residential design only. Somebody comes to them with their home, here I want to do front yard, backyard, boom, there you go. Are they then, and you issue that person a license, are they then qualified to do hotels and, parks and everything else when they've had absolutely no experience in doing that at all? But yet their license is now going to allow them to do that.
Architects at one time had that ability.
But now they don't.
Well, part of the reason was, if I can intrude, Andy, sorry, on that point, to make the example more glaring, was the hypothetical was, absent the structured internship program, the experience piece was 3 years that we were talking about. You could theoretically spend all 3 years doing toilet details. Mm-hmm. So how prepared are you to really practice in that scenario?
And in that scenario, using that as an example, which is, I'm assuming that's why the board changed that requirement, and then came up with the AXP program. And I'd be in support of that pathway if we had an AXP program for landscape architecture. We don't have that yet, and so I don't think that right at the moment that I could say that I would support that pathway until that internship program has been developed.
Can I have the opportunity to
Not
interview
yet.
as well?
Not yet.
Add some pieces.
Wow. I have some things to add too,
Oh,
but Doug
the
can
members
speak
go
first.
Oh, go. Let's have the members.
I understand what you're saying, Andy, but conceptually right now, someone who gets a 4-year degree from Cal Poly Pomona can work for a landscape architecture firm and for 2 years just do planting details, and they would be eligible to sit. So that example is there already. And once again, at the end of the day, they have to pass the LARE and the CSE. And that is the standard of measurement for getting your license. So for that reason, an experience-only route, I think, would prepare someone if they have a good, solid training, but it's up to them to get that good, solid diversity. And I support the AXP style mentorship program, training program, but I think it would be a mistake to wait for that to be in place before we allow opportunities for those who may be living in Redding or in the North Coast where they don't have access to any programs, but they want to become landscape architects, and they've been in the industry for years and they have the opportunity, or they don't have the opportunities. I think we need to provide those opportunities. Sorry, Doug.
Just to underscore what a couple people have said, ultimately it is the exam that measures whether someone's prepared to practice. The legal standard is, do you have entry-level competence that's required to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. It's literally the only legally valid measure of determining whether someone's ready or not. Education doesn't do it in and of itself. Experience doesn't do it in and of itself, whether or not you have an AXP or a LAXP, whatever it's called. The upside on the architectural part of the profession is all of those pieces are now synced with valid scientific data. So when they collect the data for the exam, for the ARE, they use that same data to develop the accreditation standards as well as the timeframes for gaining experience. So those are just pieces I want folks to keep in mind. It is indeed the exam that determines whether or not you're competent. The training / experience piece and the education piece, that's where you acquire your knowledge and your skills. It's the exam where you show I know what I'm doing, or I demonstrate that I don't know what I'm doing. The other piece, if we talk about demographics, number of licensees, that's really not a basis under which we should be making changes. Ultimately, our charge is to protect consumers and make sure the public health, safety, and welfare is guarded, and either increasing or decreasing our standards based upon market realities like that is not the right thing to do. It's highly inappropriate. And then the last piece I'd add, just to keep in mind, I'm not sure where you guys are going, but sometimes motions are approved, policies are crafted that are prospective. We will do X when Y happens 2 years hence. So there's a way maybe that you've got an option to structure something that makes all four of you happy. So just a thought.
And, you know, I just want to add a little bit about education. So we have this education requirement, but we have a lot of different mechanisms within this requirements. We have accredited schools, we have non-accredited schools. You know, in California we have the extension program, we have the community college. We have, you know, all these different educational programs, but we don't value a bachelor's degree in a related field, urban design, you know, horticulture, plant biology. I mean, I don't, you know, I think that we're making a mistake by not acknowledging, you know, these other programs, you know, to be used as an educational requirement.
One thing on education too is I know for a fact, because I teach at UC Davis, And that my grading and drainage class is, although there are similarities with those being taught at Cal Poly Pomona, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and other accredited schools in the state, that my class is different than the others, that they're not all equal. And in my perfect world, they would be equal, and that they'd be based on things we learn in terms of what we need to teach prospective landscape architects. But they're not. And so, for that reason, I'm concerned about putting too much weight on a formal landscape architecture training, although I am a huge supporter of it.
May I ask a question? In the proposed language, and I'm now looking at the chart. Here, this is the finalized chart, the cleaned up chart. I just want to understand, when we look at experience description, you go down to number 4, well, actually number 4 and 5, and others here. Number 4 says a degree in a field related to landscape architecture is defined in subsection B6, which hasn't been defined yet. Then we go down to number 5, degree in a field unrelated to landscape architecture. Are we saying that we're accepting those?
Yes, if we need to go through each one of these and make it a motion and vote. So the answer is yes.
Well, the reason why I ask is because there's nothing filled in under education max credit.
Well, we left the credit bare so that if it was acceptable to the committee, then we could figure out what would be an appropriate credit. We didn't want to confuse it at this time with the credit. But,
Yeah,
so the far column, we gave like the comparison of what the board allows for it. But keep in mind, the board's requirement is a total of 8 years.
Right.
Yours is 6. So we just wanted to show you that this is what we allow for it.
Right.
But you have the other charts in the packet that show what all the other states allow for it, what credit they get for them too.
So I guess a question for discussion could possibly be, what are the related degrees that then we would consider? Because when you look at the charts that have been provided to us, it's a very, very few degrees. And then are we considering that item number 5, a degree in a field unrelated to landscape architecture? So, I mean, these are questions that I've got in my mind, and that is why I was saying that based on what's been presented, I would not be able to in good conscience, approve what's before me right now, unless we're going to be discussing those individually and talk about whether or not they're in or out, or what credits we give, or what degrees we're talking about. Because right at the moment, we haven't even discussed degrees.
Right, yeah. Well, we could move forward with discussing each one of these, and I think it would be very appropriate to develop a list of related and unrelated degrees. And, I've noticed there are some states where they say it's at the discretion of the board. So, I think that's, something that we could include, because, there's new programs coming online. I'm just thinking of UC Davis and the program, what is it, the
Sustainable Environmental Design.
Yeah, so, it'd be real hard to kind of have a comprehensive list, but I think, having that, clause in there at the discretion of the board, how do you feel about something like that, Andy?
Well, I guess it's more of a question for Rebecca as to whether or not, I don't know if we can leave it open-ended and just say, well, it's just we'll discuss it as each one comes up.
Yeah, so the whole point of a regulation is to construct what you're requiring and have it be generally applicable. So if you notice in B6, 2 of the options laid out, one speaks more to what you were saying, this idea of just having a list of different types of degrees, but obviously, practically speaking, that's probably a little difficult depending on what arrives, who thinks what is related and what's not. The second portion of that draft, I think it is, sort of alludes to describing what components you're looking for. So in other words, if you're describing well enough what meets the qualifications, then when staff goes and they get an application, then they can properly apply it under the reg. In other words, let's see, on your draft language for B6, which is on page 4 of the draft language, it says, field related to landscape architecture shall mean, so excuse me, I had it reversed. So the second option was one where you just list actual, other programs, other degrees, like to use yours, the ones you had thrown out, horticulture, a couple others you mentioned. The first bracketed item says, maybe define the components. Maybe what's helpful to you is to say it's a program that has at least one course in grading and, or at least one course in, whatever it is, the components that fit what you're looking for, so that the reg is clear enough to where when someone comes along, staff can look at that reg and say, we can break this down and apply it easily across the board.
So insofar, there is no ambiguity on unrelated field when you qualify for the educational credit. For example, the civil engineering is unrelated or related field.
It's gone back and forth at various times.
So it was never such a clear cut, right?
Well, that's a proposal, so it would be new, because right now, they don't accept.
Oh, they don't have any unrelated.
Right, they don't, unrelated or related?
Unrelated.
The only degree that we allow
Architecture.
is architecture, in addition to landscape architecture.
Okay,
At
so
this
that's
time.
easier cut.
Yeah. So attachment G5 shows the related degrees accepted by Clarke jurisdictions to give you kind of a starting point. But Marcus just advised me for like our side, if you are pretty prescriptive, like Rebecca's saying there's those two ways of doing it, staff has found that sometimes they'll get, in the architecture program, they'll get a degree, and it seems like it's really close related, but it doesn't fall under the name of what's allowed. So you got to be careful of that. So maybe it could be two-part. It could list the ones that you know that you're going to accept, that are related, that other jurisdictions accept, and then it could have or if it has this component, and maybe we could come up with some components of the degree program for guidance for us. So we'll have maybe the best of both worlds. So that's something to consider.
And then just as far as we worked on this language, we didn't go to the extent of defining unrelated, except to say if it wasn't in B6, then it wasn't.
Then it's unrelated.
Right.
In case that wasn't.
Because I would assume you're going to give maybe some more credit to a related degree than an unrelated degree. So that's why you don't just dump them all into one pot and say any degree, right? So if you say you'll accept a related degree, you got to have some parameters, some definition, and like Rebecca says, to say as approved by the board or the committee. That's why you have the regulation, is to define it. So you need some parameters to set it.
Okay.
And I guess a question I would have is, do we as a committee have enough knowledge base to be able to know whether or not these would qualify as being related degrees? In other words, we're just 4 committee members. I mean, we're not academics, we're not, excuse me, Mark, don't mean to leave you out of that. I mean, you're an academician, but the rest of us are not. So,
Actually, I've taught for about 4 years.
Oh, I'm sorry, I take back that comment.
And I have 30 years of experience. How many do you have?
Over 40.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
So,
but again, this has to be qualified, so it's defensible in law. So if we were to say, okay, horticulture, now is that going to be considered a related field, even though they may have some bit of planting design, maybe even a little bit of irrigation design and some soils, but grading and drainage, probably not. Construction, probably not. Building materials, probably not. Is that going to be considered related? And are we qualified to make that determination? And is that an accredited field? I mean, excuse me, not an accredited field, is it an accredited program? Are we only going to accept accredited programs as being considered, acceptable to us?
Well, I mean, right now, we have landscape architecture programs that aren't accredited.
But they're landscape architecture programs.
Right, yeah.
So we're now talking about related fields that are not landscape architecture based. I guess that's my point, is that there's a lot of ambiguity there, and I would feel better if there was an actual, I don't know, would be the right term, a group or another task force or a body that we can go to that has that expertise and be able to assist us with this. And Doug, you had mentioned at one time that there may be something from the state level that might be able to help us make that determination. I don't know if I'm remembering that incorrectly.
You are, I mean, a couple different things. One, we could certainly get some guidance from the department. Right above us on the second floor, there's the Office of Examination Resources, and that operation is headed by a chief who's a PhD in whatever she is, educational psychology. And then additionally, the department at the deputy director level has someone who oversees the exam operation as well as other pieces. And she also holds a doctorate in organizational psychology. And I'm not going to say they can manage a study for us or anything like that, but they could provide us some assistance and be kind of counsel for us as we move forward.
So I just want to have some perspective. So over the past 60 years since we have licensing, only a person can become licensed architect or a landscape architect in the state is either has architecture degree or has landscape architecture degree.
No. It's for, up until 1997, you could get credit for a related degree.
Okay, then we changed.
Then we changed it, yeah.
And again, Ken, that was a direct result of the Board of Landscape Architects being sunset and the joint legislative sunset review report that came out that was very critical of the way that, I guess, the board had been organized or run, or credits being given for education or not. It's like, how can you be giving credit for a degree in biology, for landscape architecture? It was that kind of a thing. I may not be stating that correctly. I probably shouldn't speak to that because I was not involved at the time. But.
Well, I have it tagged here.
Okay.
So, and this was the sunset review comments from 2004. So that was shortly after that was when this subcommittee was.
No, this was actually prior.
1997.
This is 1997.
But I didn't think that the Education Committee was formulated in 97.
No, the Education
That's what I'm saying,
Committee
okay.
No.
We have a question.
Okay.
Stephanie.
Yes.
The background information on the cover sheet, it explains how the change in 1997. So it was under the BLA, right before they were sunsetted and went under the CAB in 1998. So
right.
the discussion to start the change, to change the education requirement began in 1994 and resolved, the finalized language was done in 1994. The finalized language was made in 1994 and the discussion began in 1991.
As I seem to recall, that had to do with the credits that were being provided for landscape contracting.
It was, and then
Yeah.
as part of the discussion evolved, I read through the minutes from the time, and the discussion evolved to the education requirement itself, and it just kept going from there.
So how is that change inform today's discussion? Just curious.
I was just bringing it up because I didn't interpret what the Sunset Review Committee said the same way that you did.
Okay.
So.
All right, well, that's fine.
They're
I'm not reading it from the book, so
Okay.
if you've got it from the book, please.
Yeah.
Please inform us.
So let's see. The Landscape Architects Technical Committee formed an education subcommittee in 2004 in response to the Joint Legislative Sunset Review Committee's recommendations to further evaluate California's eligibility requirements and access to landscape architecture licensure in California.
Okay.
So as a result, we eliminated other degrees can be qualified as education.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think that the Sunset Review Committee was telling us to evaluate the education requirements in such a way that we're going to be more restrictive versus, the position we were in prior.
I think we would need to go back to the report that was done as to why the board was sunset. Because there was a report that was created that sunset the Board of Landscape Architects. And they had some findings on that.
Honestly, that was 20 years ago.
More than
And
20 years ago.
yeah, in 1996, I was president of the CCSLA and right in the middle of all that. And my recollection is that there were legislators that were looking to do away with the license, and that was our top priority from the professional side at the time. And I don't recall this other stuff being a priority. But I am prepared to make a motion, Madam Chairman, when you're ready. We have a staff.
Just one thing I wanted to add as far as the related fields. We do rely on NCAR for a lot of providing information, and Clarke has provided the information about what they're accepting is related. They may have already conducted a study that might be available. Just something to think about.
So were we going to go through the list of
Yes, that would
experience?
be most appropriate. So we can, we can have a motion for each one of these, or I think that the first, first few.
First three?
Yeah, it could be kind of lumped together.
Because there's no change there, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's some changes, but.
Yeah, but I mean, we're already accepting those.
And I think that the changes are just clarifying, and they're
Right.
more accurate, accredited by LAAB and that type of thing. So, I'd like to open up for discussion for items 1, 2, and 3, with regard to the language that's proposed.
I'd like to make a motion to approve it as staff has prepared it.
Second.
Okay, let's see. Open it up to,
So just for clarity, you're saying 2620, the current red line draft A 1 through 3, meaning the strikeout of 3, or
no,
the new 3?
the
Okay,
new
gotcha.
3.
New 3.
So that portion right there, you're discussing.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And there was a second. Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
Yeah. So you call for comment on the motion, and then you could vote on that.
okay. Okay, public comments?
It's on 1, 2, and 3 only.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3.
Three only, I
Yeah.
am in support of your motion. However, if you determine later on that additional experience is needed, say, for any degree, or experience only, 8 years, say, then you may want to adjust 1, 2, and 3 to give 5 years credit for A1, which would match the architect's.
In other words, you're saying if
I
we
mean, there may be a
increase it, then do it
situation later
proportionally.
where you decide experience only needs 8 years, or any degree is 2 plus 6 years to make 8. Whereas our base landscape architecture education would remain 6, I would suggest that it may affect this.
Okay, so noted.
It might be easier if you don't consider the credit.
That's,
Just the type
as you
of
had mentioned
education.
earlier.
Yeah, because that might make it easier
And
to just fine tune where it's
Simplify
going.
and, yeah, move it forward. Okay, Tracy?
So, it looks like 9 has replaced 3, is that your understanding?
It's moved up.
In other words, it says extension certificate in landscape architecture program, an extension
No.
certificate
We're looking at the
program.
proposed language.
Okay.
The
I'm
proposed.
just-
1,
I know
2,
you're
and
not
3.
on 9 right now, but I'm just trying to not have extension programs get wiped out.
No, we're just
No,
on
we're
one.
not, we're just,
No,
Just
Right.
on 1, 2, 1,
1, 2, and 3.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
They're still there for
Okay.
They're just in a different order.
Okay. Any other public comments? Okay. Any further comments or discussion from the committee? Okay. Do I have a motion? Okay. Give me a second, sorry. Okay.
Roll call.
Yes, please.
Patricia Trouth.
Aye.
Mark Truscott, aye. Andrew Bowden.
Aye.
David Allen Taylor Jr.
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0.
Okay, so we have item 4. And does the committee feel that that these should be discussed separately, related versus unrelated?
Madam Chair, I recommend that we look at 4, 5, 7, and 8 together, and that we direct staff to form a education subcommittee to make recommendations to us on those issues. That subcommittee involves 2 LATC members, 1 licensed California private practitioner, landscape architect, 1 educator, and 1 California licensed landscape contractor. So that'd be the subcommittee to look at these 4 issues and to bring us back recommendations on those 4 items that right now we don't have our arms around. I think it's going to take a lot more effort to get to the bottom of that comfortably.
Yeah, yeah.
That's just my opinion.
Okay.
That sounded like a motion.
Yes.
It was a motion, if you'll accept it.
4, 5, 7, and 8, is that what you said?
Yes.
Yes. The items that right now have,
Related and unrelated to them.
and they don't have an educated maximum
Yeah.
credit identified.
I'll second.
Okay.
And just wanted to chime in here on the way that the motion was structured. You're referring to a committee that would need to be noticed under, advocating
Yes.
provisions and all that, because it's more than a 2-member committee, or it's more than a 2-member advisory committee. Just so everyone's aware of the parameters.
I think that's important.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so there's
I
no
don't mean to
problem, it was a
detract.
lot in your motion, so
Yeah,
that's.
I'm
okay,
sorry.
That's right. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's.
That's my motion, second.
Can we have discussion on the motion?
Absolutely.
I agree with the motion, except for the makeup of the committee that has been proposed.
Okay.
And I don't know what the makeup of that committee should be, but I don't know the education subcommittee had educators on it, and I would think that, when we're talking about education here, I would think that we'd want to have a similar makeup. I'm not trying to dispute that, Mark, what you've proposed. I'm just wondering if there's enough educators on that committee.
Well, if Patricia and I were on that committee, then we're both educators, so there's.
Well, it sounds like you guys just volunteered. Okay, I agree.
But.
So
but
you rattle off what you said.
I said,
Okay.
what I said was 2 LATC board or committee members.
Okay.
1 California licensed landscape architect, private practitioner. 1 California licensed landscape architect, educator. And 1 California licensed landscape contractor. And my thought about that is I'm looking for a little more diversity and a little different perspective to look at this issue. And the licensure, to me, for the landscape contractor, ensures a level of knowledge and skill with our industry. That's my background on that.
I would concur.
Sure,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, so,
Public comment?
public comment? Yes.
So, well, I agree with most of your motion. I would suggest that you remove item 5, which is any bachelor's degree, and lump that with looking at experience-only pathway. Because really, when you look at any bachelor's degree, you're essentially looking at another experience-only pathway. How would an education subcommittee evaluate any bachelor's degree? It doesn't seem to me relevant to group those when you're going to be looking at specific knowledge.
Okay.
In addition, I would request that a member of the public be included on the committee.
And why is that?
Just to have a layperson's eyes look at this.
Yeah, okay, thank you, so noted. Tracy?
Yeah, I think the California Council of ASLA is very happy with your proposal, only because they have been asking for a number of months. What Doug mentioned was a perspective review of these education standards. A lot of them, are just like Mark and yourself, Patricia, also teach at some of these different universities, and I think what they asked for, and what I think you all had already approved in April, was to bring that type of group together. There was a motion at your April meeting in Pomona to do that, just that. So they had asked for at least a 6-month review, if you could. I know Mark doesn't have a time frame on his motion, but, you know, perhaps up to that November LATC meeting with a report at the meeting, but then perhaps no action until you hear all the details of what they've discussed.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's a bit aggressive because it took us 6 years from the formation of the last to get the approved educational
I told them 6 months
document.
was too short as well, but, you know, they were saying at least that, and they would love to participate.
And maybe staff can clarify, but when we were talking about that subcommittee, at least I thought it was for the extension program, because there's a lot that needs to, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to, you know, continue to have their accreditation.
That was a separate.
There were two
It was a
efforts,
separate-
and I will say I do think it's a good idea to have a public member. I mean, whether it's one of the public members from the Architects Board or something else, that's always a good practice.
Okay.
Yeah, and Stephanie from UCLA said, to define educational equivalency, that should be done with the Committee of Educators and Practitioners. What Mark basically said, maybe not omit those other folks, invite them, as you did with your other two, educational, you know, kind of roundtables that were done, because it's still good to have that input. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to hear how any related degree would be evaluated. I just don't understand how an education subcommittee would look at any degree.
Well, that's why we're creating a subcommittee.
Well,
Yeah.
can I comment, you know, anybody who's getting a degree, say, in my case, public administration, you have to have core courses. You have to have courses on policy, you know, implementation of policy, you know, all those types of things if you're gonna be a good administrator.
Right.
And so, if you are going to be a landscape architect, I'm certain you don't kind of leap over and take these courses first. You take core courses that lead you up to your final, you know, graduation in a landscape architect's degree. So as long as it's geography degree or biology degree or whatever can kind of have similar courses, competencies, essentially, that's, I think, what that education subcommittee should be looking at.
Right, but when we're talking about any unrelated degree, that could be an English major.
That's right, and Harrison Keeler would agree with you. Sorry, that's an old joke. I know.
But that's for the.
It's over my head, sorry.
But that's for the subcommittee to deal with and to.
Well, I would argue that we are here today to, under CAB's mandate, to address basically the injustice in the system. And this is one of the pathways that would address that injustice.
Okay. Any more public comment? Okay. Then, let's see, we have a motion and a second.
And a second.
Okay.
Roll call. Patricia Trouth,
Aye.
Mark Truscott, aye. Andrew Bowden,
Aye.
David Allen Taylor Jr.
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0.
So that's without the public member?
I was just,
Oh,
The original motion was without, so unless someone amended it.
Or there's a
there
new
was not
motion.
an amendment.
What?
Or you could make a new motion.
yeah, let's.
I will make a new motion to add a public member to, now our numbers are even, which concerns me. Any help in terms of how we,
Add two, or don't worry about it.
Or
Yeah, or don't
I
worry.
might suggest maybe it doesn't need to be 2 LATC members, maybe
Or
there's
to
only one.
educators.
Wait,
what do you guys think?
I would say one one LATC member.
Okay,
There you go.
I'm good with that. Okay, so my motion, my current motion, is to alter the makeup of the Education Subcommittee to one LATC member, one private licensed California landscape architect, one licensed California landscape architect who is an educator, one licensed landscape contractor from the state of California, and one public member.
Second.
Public comment?
Again, I would just like to bring up the subject of a computer science major. It's an unrelated degree. I don't understand how an education subcommittee is going to determine.
That's the kind of the task that the committee has. Okay. Any other comments?
Roll call. Patricia Trouth.
Aye.
Mark Truscott, yes. Andrew Bowden.
Aye.
David Allen Taylor Jr.
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0.
Okay, let's see, so,
We're on 6 now.
yeah. So item number 6. And are there any others that can be?
I believe, quite frankly, that the rest of them can be lumped together, in my opinion.
With the exception of item number 12, which is an experience only.
Can you repeat that, Andy?
Well, I mean, Mark had just said that starting with item number 6 and then extending to item 9.
6,
10,
9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
could all be lumped together. And my response to that was, except for item number 12, which looks to me to be an experience only.
Correct.
And I would like to vote on experience only pathway separately.
Okay,
So 6 through 11?
No.
No, you already went through 8.
yeah, we
Oh,
went
excuse
through
me.
7 and 8, so it's
9
6.
through 11, or did you say all the way as far as
6,
13?
9, 10, and 11. No.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept staff's recommendations for A, experience equivalent, number 6, number 9, number 10, number 11, number 13, number 14, and number 15. I excluded number 12 in that motion.
Need a second.
I was waiting for DJ.
Sorry.
Okay, so open it to the public. Okay. Comments from the committee?
Roll call. Patricia Trouth.
Aye.
Mark Truscott, aye. Andrew Bowden.
Aye, but I need to recuse myself from item 9, which talks about extension certificate, as I am the chair of the UCLA Guidance Committee. So if I can recuse myself from 9, but be okay with the rest, then aye on the rest of them.
Or you can just recuse yourself from the whole vote.
Okay, I recuse myself from the whole vote.
David Allen Taylor.
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0 with 1 recusal.
Can you just confirm who made a second on that motion?
Andy did.
Oh, I guess I did.
No, it's
Well,
it
it's
can't
kind
be.
of a tie, so maybe it should be Patricia if you're
Yeah.
recusing.
It was kind of a tie.
It was,
So
yeah.
Patricia then.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Picking up on the tie.
Is that okay?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
If he recused himself, he can't say.
yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Very good.
So we have 1 left.
Yeah. And I guess, with regard to experience, I feel like, from the CAB's perspective, we've discussed this and we have, made a decision to move forward with it because we're sending a letter to Clarke regarding it. So, I just wanted to throw that out. So, do people want to discuss this more, and are we talking about some type of motion, or do we feel like we've documented it enough for purposes of this meeting today?
I think I've said my piece about it.
Okay.
Well, again, I'd just like to reiterate, I don't think that I would be able to vote for it until such time as the AXP program, similar in nature to what the architects have. I wouldn't be able to vote for it.
Okay.
I'm still in support of an experience-only path.
I'd like to make a motion to accept number 12, A12, as presented by the staff.
I'll second.
Okay.
I would like to comment.
Yes.
I believe that it's too lenient. I think it should be 8 years' experience to match the California architect. I don't want to see a situation where we get to the architect's board and it's rejected because it's not enough experience.
I think it hasn't been seconded yet.
No, it has been seconded.
You know, this,
8 years' experience.
okay.
Mind I make a comment on that? In none of these have we discussed the length of term.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we were just talking about the
Content.
actual content of it. So,
Yeah.
I mean, so right at the moment, we're not talking about number of years.
No, we're not.
I'm sorry, my motion was as presented by staff,
Yeah,
including
Right.
numbers.
motions as well.
That was my intent.
But
The thought of
early on,
not
we did talk
looking
about
at the
it,
time
thought
to
it was-
discuss,
Yeah.
the motion was,
Exactly.
so where's that one?
And our experience only is year for year, so we have a total of 8 required. We don't require 10 for experience only, it's 8, so.
Okay. So I guess
That's-
I'm,
When you say we, you're talking about the architect.
Yes.
And
So
I-
when we're talking about LATC, it's 6. We have 4 and 2.
Right.
It has to have
Right.
6.
Right.
So if we want to change that to 8, I mean, we can pick any number we want, but if you recall, last year we came up with 10 years, and then.
That was post-licensure.
And you have to be able to justify it, so you're gonna have to substantiate why you're tacking on, say, 2 years or whatever, but your requirement is 6.
so this one in particular, I feel like we are moving forward with it. So I think, when we report back to the architect's board, we can say that we have addressed it because we are moving forward with a letter to Clarke. I think we need to have more discussion on this. I support it completely, but, I'm just wondering if there's major repercussions for, not moving this piece of it forward with everything else.
Well, nothing's really moving forward since there's 4 chunks getting sent to a committee at this point, I think.
I mean, we would give the outcome of today's meeting
Right.
to the board.
Right.
And how you've taken these steps and what your
Mhm.
plan is.
Mhm.
But it would be better if you could address that one now.
Do we need to clarify all previous 3 votes, all with, including the credit as proposed by staff?
I think as far as the motions were made, they said as presented by staff.
Because the first 3 already are in existence. There's already a credit allowed for the
Okay,
first
so
3.
we don't need-
The other 4 are going to that
Committee,
working group,
yeah.
right? And then
And then the
this.
other ones had years next to them that were
Right.
proposed, and it was said as staff proposed.
Right, because those are already in existence. They were just minor or somewhat modifications to the wording of the requirement. So this one, though, is with the year's experience indicated was the motion.
Where do you stand on this, Andy, the experience one?
I can't support it until we have an AXP type of monitoring system. in support of it.
Could we change the language to include that? I would be more comfortable with it too, because I think, there's, that one is, it's not defined a whole lot at this point on how we would implement.
So it's kind of a if this, then that kind of thing. So if there's an internship program that can be, a structured internship program that can be developed, then, it could be approved.
But even if we have the structured internship program, which I think is a good thing and beneficial, we still don't have control over the quality of that internship program. And at the end of the day, the individual still has to pass the LARE and the CSE. That's how we measure our licensed landscape architects.
In my mind, I'm still trying to come up with that education component. So I'm trying to qualify the fact that we're going to allow a certain amount of structured internship that's going to take the place of education.
Yeah.
And we're going to tell them what it is that they need to be taught on the job. They need to have this kind of experience because that's going to help ensure to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public.
I agree.
So,
and I think that there's a real benefit to that. But I also agree to the fact that they still have to pass these exams.
Yes, and I think we all recognize that. But in the effort to craft this in a way that, the whole board can embrace, I would like to add the internship, some language that that's appropriate. You want to put something in?
I wouldn't even know how to begin.
Okay.
I mean, we don't have an internship program, and so.
Well, I think we're talking about crafting something similar to what NCARB is.
We are, but NCARB is not CAB. They're not the board.
Right.
They are NCARB.
Right.
Clarke is the one that would have to put this together. We would adopt whatever structured internship program they come up with. Is that how it works, Greg?
Yes, that's the short
It's
answer.
conceptual.
Is-
Conceptual.
I was gonna say, that's assuming though that Clarke,
Even is interested in doing
Right.
it. And Clarke, if it gets approached to them and they may say, we don't have the staff, we don't have the ability or the desire to have a structured internship program, then where does that leave us? Then we might be able to come back and readdress that particular item. But,
to me, that seems like a very large contingency.
Yeah.
Yeah, if can be a state-based process that will satisfy you, maybe you say this way, by committee determining, the structure determined by committee or by.
Well, we are developing a state-based process for the extension program.
Yeah, emulating that.
So,
Is one of your concerns when you're talking about structure, the kind of variety of exposure? Because that's what it sounds like. So perhaps, just throwing out ideas in the same way that you break down credit for other components. Number 12 is structured in a way that it's experienced under a licensed landscape architect. What if you could only get up to 4 years credit if it was one type of landscape architecture, and you could get another 3, up to 3 if it was another type. In other words, there are ways that you can structure this internship program you're talking about, in a way. Do you see what I'm saying? So in other words, if you can zero in on that variety that you're looking for and say, well, if it's only residential, then we're willing to give you up to 2 years or 5 years or whatever's appropriate for you from a policy standpoint. And if it's someone who does commercial XYZ, then we're willing to give 3 to 4 years for that. Then somebody who comes to you with a variety of experience is now meeting some of that structural. So anyway, just trying to throw out ideas to hit the vacuum you're talking about, because you're right, this contingency is pretty huge when you're talking about hoping that some other entity creates something you're talking about.
And that might be hard for them to qualify it and staff to be able to review it and give them credit for it if, like, they worked for a firm that did multiple types of projects. How would you measure that and how would they document their employment there? That might get kind of complicated to give them credit for where they deserved in the area.
right, I don't, at this meeting, I don't want to get into the weeds. I want to you know, be a lot more informed on what NCAR is doing, you know. But, you know, I would like to kind of codify this in some way, and,
Well, if we were to develop, if the LATC were to develop an internship program, you know, where we're kind of in control of what the directive is, then, you know, that might be something to be considered. But to just openly say, well, just do 6 years under a licensed landscape
Yeah,
architect,
no.
regardless of what that
Mhm.
entails, to me, just does not seem logical.
Right. And, you know, as I reiterated before, I mean, we are going to be, you know, having conversations about the extension program, and, you know, so this might just be something else that subcommittee takes on.
I have a question. I'm new to the committee, but I'm not sure if there was any discussion whether you could just keep this provision as is for now, because it's already part of your reg. It's item 10. So perhaps until you know more about the direction the internship program might go, or AXP, perhaps you just leave this one alone and deal with all of the others until you have more information. My caveat there is just whether or not the board directed you to do something on this particular
They
piece
did.
now.
They did. They wanted them to consider an experience-only pathway, because our board has one, and it's difficult to justify why it's okay for architects and engineers to have an experience-only pathway, but it's not okay for landscape architects. And there was many years when ours wasn't structured. They just had to work under the direct supervision of a licensee. So.
But then it did get structured because there was an understanding that there wasn't enough education that's protecting the health, safety, welfare of the public through that process. So understanding that they needed something that was going to provide that level of protection by coming up with the structured internship program, as I understand it.
Well, see, I don't agree with that.
Yeah,
I don't remember that.
Part, I think what happened was the program was developed by NCARB, and I think, Doug, correct me, but I think it was like available for like 30 years. And over time, it evolved, and when the board was first considering it, they believed in the program, but then they wanted a comprehensive overlay on it so that, you know, it could support the type of training that they got. So we had, for a while, we had their internship program, and then we had this comprehensive overlay. And that got kind of confusing for our candidates because we had something different than the rest of the nation. So then as IDP evolved and we believe it improved, then we did away with the comprehensive overlay and we just stuck with the IDP program. And then recently they've made other enhancements to it. So it's really evolved over time. But there's no guarantee that Clarke is going to go for this, because I bet while NCARB was considering it, they thought of it too. So it's not, you know, a lot of times what NCARB does, Clarke, you know, monitors.
Is there an opportunity for us to dust off IDP? That was the state-run.
CIDP. Yeah, let me augment what Vicki said a little bit. The reason the board held off on adopting IDP for many of those 30 years is it was the board's opinion that it was simply too quantitative. It was checking boxes as to whether or not you have enough seat time doing different things. And the reason we developed what we called comprehensive IDP was to enrich NCARB's IDP by overlaying an evidence-based component. So we actually created the context for true mentoring. I'd have work product as the intern, I'd sit down with Patricia, and she'd actually train and educate me on how I did something right, how I could do something better, or what have you. So that was an important thing for the board, and it was a condition of us adopting IDP. We wanted our overlay with it, and then, as Vicki mentioned, there have been these improvements over the years, and the board became comfortable enough with all the enrichments to IDP that we actually decommissioned CIDP. So that's where we are today and how we got there. I'm not sure I helped.
Just a point of clarification. I think I did make a motion and
You
it
have a
was
motion on the
seconded.
floor.
Yeah, and we're in a
Okay.
discussion
Okay, just want to make sure.
mode here, yeah.
And we have public comment too.
Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering if there's any way to strengthen what we have here a little bit more so that you're comfortable with it. Now, Doug, you said one thing you can do is you can like have a date associated with it, that it wouldn't come online. I mean.
That's an idea. I don't know if it's a good one, but
Yeah.
yeah, you could adopt it prospectively and say commencing January the 1st, whatever, 2020, this will take effect, and then during the time leading up to that, we could work as hard as we can with Clarke and see if we can't get them to launch something, or we figure out a better approach on our own, like the board did with CID. I'm not lobbying for that approach
Yeah.
because it's not
Yeah.
ideal, but.
Yeah.
You could make a recommendation to the board that you're, in concept, you agree with the experience-only pathway, but that you prefer that before it's implemented,
We have
that
additional
Clarke,
research and,
you
yeah.
know, has that internship
Yeah,
program.
could we say that we're pushing in that direction, but we would also maybe put this to the education, or to the task force on those other items, and let them review that as well?
Okay with that? Okay.
I mean, I know I seconded your motion, but
Yeah.
I'm kind of coming to something that gives us a little more thought to this.
Okay, so we need to rephrase the motion.
Well, you can either vote on it and see if it passes or fails, or you can amend, someone,
Amend.
those that made the motion could amend their motion.
Okay.
But before you vote, you should get public comment.
Okay, public comment?
I'm sorry, could you restate the motion one more time before I comment?
Well, at this point, the motion is to accept 12 as it's stated.
As it's
Or-
presented by.
Or revise your
staff.
motion. You don't have to wait for public comment to
Yeah,
revise your motion.
exactly.
Yeah, if you want to revise.
So the motion is to accept item 12 as.
As stated.
Presented.
Yeah.
Tracy?
I think you need to keep working on it. So I think being perspective and allowing all the other input that you're looking for. And I can see why he mentioned 8 years, because if you look at the top of the first part of the chart, it says board's maximum credit for similar experience out of 8 years. So that's,
Yeah.
I was looking at that too when you all mentioned 6 years. Is it because it reflects CAB's 8 years?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's,
got it.
it's just equal for equal.
Yeah, I think, keep working on it. It's, it's something that a lot of people will want input on.
Okay, I absolutely support the motion as stated. However, I would like to see it amended to add a caveat. So it'd say 1 to 6 years, and then 8 years for those with no education credit in that same box. And I would just like to remind us all that we're under mandate from CAB to do something today. And what we're facing, if this doesn't pass, is that we've done nothing. But what we always do, which is just put things off to the future. And I've been at this since 2012. I've attended quite a few of these meetings. That was when my reciprocity application was submitted, and I encourage you to please just make it one pathway,
Yeah.
one, do something.
And I think we've made a lot of progress today, so,
We didn't open any new pathways.
Okay.
I'd like to.
Anything else you want to say?
Sorry.
Yeah, there's a little bit more. I would say that I believe the debate about this is over because of CAB's direction. I'd say that I've never heard one valid argument why our pathway shouldn't match California's architects and civil engineers. California civil engineers do not have a structured internship program. They have a 3-year, any experience under a licensed civil engineer, then you take the EIT, and then you do 6 more years of experience and take the PE, and that's if you have no education. So that's 9 years experience for an engineer. Seems to me 8 should be plenty for a landscape architect. Thank you.
I guess I was just a little confused about the internship and what you guys were talking about earlier, so you kind of shed some light on it, but what if you're in a firm where you only work on residential jobs? I mean, granted, I work for somebody who, all we do is commercial developments. All we do is commercial work. We've done very few private residences. We've done 5-acre park. 800 unit rental prices, stuff like that. So it's hard for me to sympathize because I don't really understand it, but at the same time, it's like, how does that person gain experience through the internship program without having to relocate themselves, find a job for somebody who actually does that? But if you work out in, like you say, in the North Coast somewhere, where the only thing that people have to work on is a residential type firm. So does that person then have to move to the Bay Area, move to a city to become a better intern in order to have that type of experience? Or do you prove yourself by taking a rigorous test that's going to essentially put you to the test at what your knowledge basis is?
Yes, so, obviously, item 12, is going to require additional conversations. But what we're trying to do now is craft some text that we can all feel comfortable with to move this forward, to respond to the CAP.
Can I answer briefly though? I think I know the answer to that. I don't believe there's a restriction as to the type of project. I'd like to go back and double check it, but my recollection going back to when we adopted IDP is there's no stipulation as to the type of project, public, commercial, residential.
So it's the person that you're working for is responsibility to essentially train you in things that they're not necessarily working on, but they take a time out of their schedule to work with you in order to fulfill that internship requirement.
It's the program that's available, and
I'm just
gain
curious
experience
about how it works for the people that are only in specific, because you're in this field where
right.
Not everybody has the opportunity to work on those types of jobs or have a person that's willing to do that for you. So
well, we'll do a deeper dive into it, or Marcus.
I can say it right now. Because when we first adopted IDP, there were 17 areas, and not every firm offered all of those areas. So in the revamp, what you would call IDP 2.0, they looked at them. The current version, which is now AXP, looks at the 6 areas of practice. And it's basically, you have the 96 tasks, and you collect your experience just doing the work at these 6 areas of practice. It's not looking at type of practice at all. Because as we found with IDP, a firm may specialize and may have a person that all they do is code research every day. And they aren't necessarily going to get that experience, and they would. We got this question a lot, where people would say, am I expected to leave my job and go elsewhere? NCARB heard that from a lot of candidates and reevaluated how the program was structured. So that now it aligns with the 6 divisions of ARE 5.0, so that you're basically being tested on the same areas you're getting your experience in. And it's a far better approach than what IDP was beforehand. And NCARB is very active in AXP. They admitted that for a long time it had just stagnated, and that's why we needed to have our additional component of CIDP on it. But now with the dynamic changes that they're making and the attention they're giving it, it is kind of a moving target now. As they see the need for improvement backed up by their practice analyses, then they are making those improvements to the program.
Another question I have, I guess, is so in that internship program, before it was established, so say that an internship program is established for landscape architects today, right? If somebody has 8 to 12 years of experience already, is that person expected to then do another 6 years or however long of the internship program, or do you have some sort of way to get your qualifications through, I don't know, talking to the people that they work for? I mean, how do you do that? So does that,
That'll be up to the program. I have no way to know that.
Right. So in essence, it's like, okay, if I have 8 years of experience, basically, in order to do experience only, I'd have to actually have 14. Right? Then I'd have to do internship.
We had an implementation date that was out there. So if you
That's
had
how the
your
program's
application
structured.
filed by a certain date.
You can be
would
grandfathered
submit.
in.
Okay,
It depends how it's structured.
Yeah.
We have 3 conversations going. So the answer is it depends. Depends how it's structured.
And then
But that is a real issue. And
how is that?
Do you know how it works with that? I know there's currently a pathway for folks with vast experience in the profession, and it facilitates documentation of all of their hours and years, and for them to accrue credit and complete the program. So NCARB has a pathway, it would be incumbent upon Clarke to be sensitive to that issue. And
So it says
I
that
would
you have
hope
a
they
committee
would.
that kind of looks at what you're presenting as far as your experience, and they kind of look through that before they can give you any kind of credit towards that.
I'd urge you to go to NCARB's website, they have very robust content, and clearly I don't know.
But Clarke has, Clarke, you know, if you get Clarke certified, they go back through all of your experience, your employers, you get everything documented. So there is that structure in place for Clarke. Now it's, you know, we would have to, you know, be expanded to address something like this, obviously, but it's, you know, it's something that
Very
they track on.
expensive to maintain that record.
A few $100 a year.
All adds up.
Vicki, did you want to add something?
I was just saying that when we implemented IDP, we had a future date, and if you had applied prior to that date, you were exempt from it, and then after that date, you had to comply. We still have candidates that are still active in the system that are exempt from it, so.
Yeah, we just ran a report this morning.
Yeah.
There are 75% of our candidates are required to do AXP at this time.
So there's 25% that are still exempt.
25% are not, but that's dropped over 12 years.
Of course.
Okay. Okay, so
So the motion on the floor is to leave it just like how it's presented.
I'd like to amend my motion.
there we go. Okay.
I'd like to amend my motion as such that we accept A, experience equivalent number 12 as presented by staff with one addition, that this will become effective January 1st, 2020.
Wow. It's not summarizing a statute. So,
You can still stick the date in the red. It's just if they're not approved, then it becomes an issue.
yeah. And then,
It would probably be a separate reg to be effective that date, I guess.
yeah, I'm not sure how that would go through OAL or what you would be just, or
We
how
did
you.
with IDP.
And then you would explain that you're waiting on something else, or you just say, oh, that's the date?
Maybe we just say that's the date. Sorry,
Yeah, that's the day.
With the board, we had a different scenario. We had a program that was in existence, and we said commencing this date, it's sort of.
I guess from a rulemaking standpoint, is there a reason you chose that date, or what is it?
Because I think any sooner is really difficult with our attempt to get Clarke to adopt a program and get the other NCARB to get on board, and it's going to take a little time to get, I believe, a mentorship training program together that we can implement with those. We're just trying to buy us a little time.
It's just that the reg doesn't call for that mentorship program, so I wasn't sure how that.
I think it's still, in my opinion, it's still really up in the air
Yeah.
in terms of what it's going to be, so I'm hard pressed to define it.
But, you know, with that caveat, we have addressed it, and then we have addressed, you know, all these different aspects of this regulation. So,
One note.
yes.
Since that may affect the process of some candidates who are relying on existing law, which is existing item 10, A10, you perhaps would want to structure it so that the existing provision stays on or before January 1, 2020, and then on or after January 1, 2020. It's the provisions that staff has laid out in this ruling.
I see what you're saying.
So that way, anyone who's already started the path based upon existing law, they have proper notice that it's changing. And they can alter their path as necessary. Otherwise, this changes and perhaps it changes in a way that people aren't ready for it. So you provide just a really good guideline as to someone who's already in process and someone who starts it later.
On A12,
Yeah.
A12 doesn't exist now. So
A10 does.
A10 is a partial completion of a degree. And we're talking about.
No, excuse me, she's referring to what's labeled as 10 in the current
Oh,
regulation.
I'm sorry.
Which is self-employment.
We're looking at the market operation.
Sorry.
10 is self-employment as or employment by a landscape architect
Right.
licensed in the jurisdiction.
Right.
So it's kind of a drafting comment. It's, in other words,
Yeah.
adding that language in to show when the change happens over. So I think you're still.
I agree with what, Tara, you said.
Okay.
I don't know how to wrap that into my motion other than saying I agree with your structural comments.
This would effectively make it become a 12, which would maintain existing law up until January 1, 2020 for this provision only. Then, I mean, it could be 12A and 12B. And, you know, number-wise, that doesn't really matter. That's just minor changes later, but the 12B would effectively be on or after January 1, 2020, the new 12, this language. I know it sounds relatively minor, this construction, but there are times that if this due process isn't provided, clearly it could be a stumbling block later.
Yeah.
So just to reiterate, so you said we would be adding to, I'm looking at the new 12.
Right.
Okay, so on or after 2020, experience as or experience obtained under the direct supervision, blah, blah, blah. That's how it'd be worded.
Effective
Yeah.
January 1st, 2020.
Yeah, I was putting it at the beginning. Okay, then the other one that you were mentioning was?
No.
No.
Okay, I think.
Do I need to
I
restate?
think he's proposed a revision to his amendment. If that's seconded, then we can go forward. I think Tara's comments are duly noted in terms of how it would be drafted. I think
Okay.
that's all that's needed at this point.
Right.
Good.
I don't think there's a second at this.
No, there's not.
There's not a second.
I'm not gonna second it at the moment, so we can't discuss it until there's a second, right? There has to be a
Right.
second, then there's discussions.
I think so.
Otherwise, the motion fails.
I'm just curious about the language in 12 now as I'm looking at this a little closer. If we take out or experience obtained under the direct supervision of it, the 12 would read experience as a landscape architect licensed in the jurisdiction where the experience occurred. Does that make sense?
You're saying experience as a landscape architect, in other words, what that is saying is you're a licensed landscape architect, but that license is for whichever
Got it,
jurisdiction you're
okay.
practicing in.
Got it, thank you.
It's a slightly clunky, I agree, but if they're trying to.
I got it now, thank you.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it just so we can discuss it.
Okay.
How's that confused? Is the motion, did that include verbiage about creating some kind of ITP program?
No.
No.
It
specifies
Just an just a date effective.
Yeah. So.
I think it's too gray right now in terms of what it's going to be to tie us to something.
Okay, I can't support it.
Well, Andy, can I give a hypothetical? Maybe this helps, maybe it doesn't. If Clarke comes back with a hard no, when we see them in 2 months at the annual meeting, then we know we can either A, develop something else, or revisit the issue. So I think that's what Mark's after, is an opportunity to resolve the issue, ideally through Clarke. But there's the opportunity for Plan B if necessary.
But we don't know what that Plan B is, and can't guarantee that it's gonna be, in which case it becomes effective January 1st, 2020.
You're correct.
I can't support it unless there's gonna be some kind of internship program. So that'd be the only way that I would vote for it.
Well, I'd like to have consensus on this. So,
Well, we don't have to. We can vote and see how we go.
Okay. We got 3 years.
Well, we need to vote.
Yeah.
Public comment.
Public comment.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that an associate's degree and 1 year experience under a landscape architect and 4 years experience as a landscape contractor, that's what I consider the current minimum standard. So that's only 1 year experience under a landscape architect in this state, is more valid and ensures the health, safety, and welfare of the public more than 8 years experience under the direct supervision of a licensed landscape architect. So that's the message as a member of the public I am receiving.
Where do you get the, I don't understand what 8 years comes from.
Or I'm sorry, I'm 6 years.
Okay, there you go.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that. The second observation I'd like to make is that this motion and all the previous past motions do not do what was mandated by the California Architects Board. It just serves to further delay the process another 2.5 years. I'm sure the Education Subcommittee is going to delay that part even further. So I don't see how we've resolved anything today and done anything that we were directed to do. Thank you.
I'm still inclined to somehow come up with something that says that we appreciate and would like to implement an experience-only path, but we will not be implementing until such time as we come up with what that years of experience is and how that is structured, and that would be the portion I would say would go with the others that we're talking about to the task force on paths to licensure and experience required.
Okay, so, you know, I understand what you're saying, I understand what you're saying, Andy, and, you know, I think we all are pretty much kind of in agreement here. I just think we need to craft some language that's gonna work for staff and legal, correct? Now, the words that I've heard are, you know, an internship, you know, something similar to, what do the architects call it?
AXP.
AXP. Can we craft some language that kind of embraces all of this so that, you know, we're in agreement with it?
Can you modify your motion twice? Technically, you can?
I'm not interested in modifying
Yeah,
my motion.
just study the feasibility of this.
Okay.
Excuse me. Also, I'd like to point out from a timeline perspective, particularly with the constraints on LATC, where you're going through the approval of CAB, and then the initiation of a rulemaking process. I mean, you guys have a better estimate than I do, but by the time it works through agency, DCA legal, DCA ledge reg, the public comment process, OAL approval, I mean, you're looking at
Close to that date anyway.
Exactly. I mean, and I don't say that to necessarily encourage the idea of like creating more of a buffer of time. I think maybe just be aware of the timeline, and I think that it's one thing to build in a buffer of time, but I think it's helpful to know what that's contingent upon or what you're looking to have happen in the meantime. Otherwise, there's kind of just a date that's being set, and it's unclear as to why or what would be achieved or accomplished before. I think you guys have kind of batted around what you're trying to accomplish in that time. But I think, you know, from a rulemaking standpoint, what is the reasoning for a certain date? Especially when, at the end of the day, it's going to end up being almost when a reg would take effect anyway, assuming everything went smoothly and it was adopted. I mean, I think even conservatively, you're looking at mid to late 2018 for a regulation to be effective, I think.
But during that period of time, can some kind of licensing program be started?
Something could come together, but I think, again, from a rulemaking standpoint, your staff is being tasked with explaining what it is you're trying to achieve. They've got an ISR that they put together that says, here's the problem we're solving, here's why this solves it, whatever. And if you're sort of waiting and hoping that other things are happening in that interim, in that in that interceding time, that puts your staff in an odd position to then be justifying things differently, I think, than what was originally set out. I mean, I don't want to speak for you guys, but I think from a rulemaking standpoint, it makes things a little tricky. It sounds to me, and you can correct me here, it sounds to me like the distinction when Architecture Board did it was that there was something sort of in the works. So maybe the contingency was maybe more clear.
No, it was more about having a date certain and providing a ramp-up period for education of the profession, for outreach to the schools.
Oh, I thought you were saying that intern program was like in existence or coming into existence.
Oh, yeah, it absolutely was. It had been
Right.
in existence, but we wanted a implementation opportunity. So rather than the regs being effective upon signature from OAL, we said January 1st, 2005. And also the opportunity for folks who wanted to be grandfathered to become grandfathered. We wanted to provide a reasonable opportunity for the marketplace to react and for people to choose how they wanted to address the new requirements.
I see. And this one sounds like you're not necessarily matching a program that already exists. It's time to hope that maybe that comes together. I'm not sure.
We're hoping to match a program that exists with the architects.
It doesn't yet exist.
Well,
Whereas
no.
with the architects, it did.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
I'd also point out that under the architects, they have experience under the direct supervision of an architect licensed in jurisdiction, separate from completion of IDP. So perhaps the discussion is 12, current 12, or as staff is
The new 12.
The new 12, which matches Architects 8, and also provide separately for the completion of an internship program at such time as that is developed. So I think that way you've got two pieces. You revise what you currently have so that it's more appropriate, but you're also getting at this internship issue, which is a real sticking point, and our architects already have that. They're already providing that avenue. So is it possible to have two separate methods? One for experience as drafted in new 12, and separately completion of an internship program as developed by the national something.
I don't think we need to have two. I mean, I think we can combine.
And in my opinion, I have a problem with the experience on it. No internship, no nothing.
Yeah.
That's what I've got a problem with. So,
So you effectively want to get rid of that existing.
it doesn't exist now.
There's a
Well,
5-year credit.
it's-
You can get 5 years of credit.
Right, and this suggests that you don't get any more than 5 years for.
So would it
Your
be,
real
a-
minimum would
potentially, would it then only be a 1-year internship program? Because right now, your 5 years aren't structured. So are you,
No, you're giving
are
them
you-
5 years of experience, and they need 1 year of education.
Right, so if you did go towards an internship program, how many years would they have to be? Like ours is, you can do 8 years of experience only, and when you complete the internship program, I think that gives you credit for 3 and the total 8. So if you kind of weigh that with your requirements, that only really leave 1 year of your 6 where you have an education component that you want structured in their experience. So you're really only holding out for 1 year of a training program.
Well, it's an associate's degree at a community college. That's 2
But you
years.
get 1 year,
You get
you get 1 year credit,
Yeah.
1 year towards the 6.
For an associate's degree.
So if you don't have an issue with the other 5 years right now, it doesn't have to be structured right now, and you have an issue with that 1 year credit, it seems like that would be your only amount of time towards your
time frame.
internship program, yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't seem substantial enough.
I'd like to make a motion.
There's currently a motion on the floor that hasn't been voted
Okay.
on.
Okay. the motion that's on the floor right now is the one that has the date on it, correct?
Yes.
I
Okay.
mean, if it helps the discussion, you could draw out what you're considering for proposals so that people can consider, like, for example, you know, when DJ was suggesting sending this to committee to further discuss things, I mean, that's a variety of proposals to consider as you move into a vote on the current motion.
Okay, well, what I was proposing was to keep the information as is on the new 12, and then add, and completion of an internship program. So it would read, experience as or experience obtained under the direct supervision of a landscape architect licensed in the jurisdiction where the experience occurred, and completion of an internship program. Or it could be in conjunction with an internship program.
So, confuse me, if I'm licensed in Nevada, those years that I get credit for, I have to have an internship program also? What that reads.
Yeah, I guess right now I don't want to get into the weeds on this.
Okay.
But I do want to have something in there that qualifies it a little bit more than just saying experience. And so that's, and I think that's where Andy's coming from, that you would like it a little more structured, and DJ, I kind of heard you kind of saying the same thing. So I'm trying to take a stab at, giving it a little bit more structure, and it's also not suggesting, it's saying that you would complete some type of internship program. I don't know exactly what that is, how long it is, how many different, areas, but, it is something that we would then, start to define as a committee.
So, if I may, we have to consider, say, worst case scenario, the AXP fails with, or something like that as an internship program fails getting through Clarke, and it's up to us to determine what that is. In order to sit for the exam, your employer has to sign off on your experience within that firm. And if it's more than one firm, that you have to get signed off on that sort of experience. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if there, and I'm not saying we need to get into this, but could something like that serve as a form for certification of an internship program in a firm for experience? And if so, is that something that can be worked on through a subcommittee developing that?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
And that's sort of why I'm not sure how to put it, though, but to basically say that our approval of the experience program or path is contingent upon developing what that pathway is exactly, because it should be a structured pathway.
Right. And, yeah.
If we talk about doing that, can we set aside as a separate item the experience as a landscape architect licensed in the jurisdiction where the experience occurred, and leave that as 1 to 6 years of credit, year to year? So we strip out those who've already passed the LARE, their UNE, whatever they passed, mm-hmm. and then we look at just experience obtained as a separate. Are you following me on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It is kind of odd the way it's worded.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to.
So if I'm licensed in Arizona, and I've been licensed for 6 or 7 years, when I come here, I get credit for that. And then I can sit for the CSE, and if I pass it, then I'm licensed.
But in that case,
you're talking about
then that becomes reciprocity.
Reciprocity, yeah,
yes,
that's why I was,
exactly.
Yeah.
But the way it's written right now,
I know it's very.
So that's agenda item. That's we're talking about that soon. Right now, we're trying to, this all has to do with, being able to sit for the exam.
right,
Yeah.
right. Well, sit for the CSE also, in this case.
Well, yeah, I mean, you sit for both of them. You have to pass the national exam, and then you can sit for the, yeah.
But because 12 pertains to licensed landscape architects in other jurisdictions,
That's the direct supervision.
No, experience as.
Experience as, or experience obtained under
So if
the
you-
direct supervision.
So if you take out that,
Just
where
want
it
to.
says, experience as, where there's a comma, don't have a comma, get rid of or experience obtained under the direct supervision of a landscape architect. So it'd read, experience as a licensed landscape architect, or a landscape architect licensed in the jurisdiction where the experience occurs.
Right. And then just leave the 1 to
So
6
that would be-
years, so
that
strike
would be
that
that
out.
one, and then there'd be beneath that, experience obtained under the direct supervision of a landscape architect.
Or it can be 14. You can
Yeah.
have a 14
Yeah.
and spell out what that is. And
Either
so-
way, that can effectively stand in as reciprocity, because you're talking about somebody who's experienced.
Right.
Yeah.
Basically.
It's just awkward the way it is.
Yeah, it is kind of awkward, yeah.
Do you eliminate that language that talks about that, because it is reciprocity?
Yeah, and this is supposed to be qualifications for sitting
For sitting for the
Well,
exam,
or-
which is kind of
But the
confusing.
exam includes
Or
the
rather
CSA.
than, to your point, rather than eliminating the not language, it could end up rendering that other right less necessary, or less needed, it could alter that one. It depends on what you're trying to achieve, and again, also, if you're talking about the components themselves, like experience as a component, right? That's a separate concept from the amount of years you're assigning to it. So for example, it sounds like what I'm hearing, some of the things batted around is, if you're saying experience and an internship program, well, now it sounds like you're creating two components, and internship program's worth some, and experience is worth up to a certain amount. Because what you're saying is, it's kind of like currently it's up to 5 years, but then you have to supplement it with something else like an internship program. I mean, I'm only attempting to pare it back, the kinds of discussion I'm hearing from you, but from an organizational standpoint, because you're talking about it's kind of clunky and confusing, it sounds like that's kind of what you're doing, it's breaking it down into other things.
Well, I always thought it was experience within this umbrella of an internship program. That's how I wanted to craft it. I'm not sure. I think that's what you were talking about.
That's what I want too.
So, you know.
Oh, so,
But,
yeah.
but we've not stated that, and that's not the way the motion is.
Yeah, I guess
begun.
maybe that's what you're doing.
I
So
might have missed-
instead of what looks like stacking, which is one thing that we were trying to get away from when we were drafting this, just pull out all the components so it's really clear. It's not, several components stacked into one provision. What you're talking about isn't experience plus internship. It's the experience in internship.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
And the way the.
And maybe it's just that simple, experience right in the beginning in an internship program.
I don't think we can implement that, because I don't know what that means. Here's the issue for you. I think to really boil it down to its basic essence, either today you support an experience-only pathway, or you don't today. You might be supportive of it whenever there's an LAXP, but for today, I think maybe your core policy issue is, do you support an experience-only pathway today?
Can we put experience and put internship in parentheses?
I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
I can't implement that for you.
It doesn't exist.
If there was an LAXP that existed and you said you gotta do that as your internship, I mean,
No, this
explaining
makes
it
sense, in fact,
precisely.
to sort of add to that, what I was trying to get at before is if you, let's say we support experience only today, then the second step, what I was saying is, the second column comes in, okay, it's one thing to say we support experience only, does that mean 2 years, 8 years, 3 years? So that's why there's the two aspects going on. You could take Doug's point and say, okay, step one, do we support some level of experience only could work for us? If the answer is yes, then you can move forward and say, well, what does that look like? Does it look like 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, you know what I'm saying? Then you're justifying that as you go. What he's getting at is, if you're calling it experience, then it's, you have to be careful not to clutter it up with what of these other concepts like internships or things, because we need to be able to clearly define what it is.
Well,
Is that fair?
cluttering it up, but you're gonna have to define it, at some point.
Well, at this point, the definition is, you have experience being supervised by a licensed professional or as a licensed professional. So So that's one definition, right? That's what Doug's saying, either you support that today, or you
It's
don't. And then step two is for how long would you require?
If you're not as simple yes,
Yeah.
then you're no. You're basically no for purposes of motions and votes. That's how I'm looking at it at this point.
And I think the only in-between I'm seeing is sending it to this working group, just because, not because you guys can't, don't wanna get into the details and sort out what you agree with, but because it sounds like your intent with the working group was to pull together a variety of perspectives. So that's the only in-between that I can see at this point.
Well, okay, so the way it is right now, I think it kind of is clunky. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I'm wondering if we just started with the second line and said, experience obtained under the direct supervision of a landscape architect licensed in the jurisdiction where the experience occurred.
The rest of it, though, you need to cover in the equivalence, because you're going to have licensees in another jurisdiction that don't have a current license that are coming to you for a California license. So you have to have, it's not really reciprocity, but they've had their own self-employment in another jurisdiction and they deserve credit for that. So if you eliminate that component of it, you won't have credit allowed for those individuals. So maybe split it, but don't eliminate it.
I got a little confused about you said an expired license or something like that?
Yeah, they're not coming to you as reciprocity because they had their license in another state and maybe it's no longer valid.
So they're going for initial.
They're going, yeah,
Oh,
they're going for a license here and they have to get some kind of credit.
Oh, and they're saying, well, at one point I did 5
Yes,
years in a
yes.
different state. with
And
my
that
own
goes to
license.
your point where you said, are those people gonna have to do an internship program and they've been licensed in another state, so it covers that
And
situation?
then that's they would have to sit for the LARA and the CSE, correct?
Yeah.
If they hadn't previously passed it, but they probably had previously passed the LAR, right? If they were licensed in another jurisdiction. But they'd have to be given some
Then it does come
credit.
to reciprocity.
Yeah, I see that as
They might not have a
reciprocity.
current license, so reciprocity normally
I see your
is
point.
the
I see your
current
point.
I'd like to just point out that, to the extent you guys are trying to satisfy the architect's board, they break it up. Experience as a licensed person doing this in another jurisdiction, that's one piece. Right now, what we have is, it's combined under existing law and as this is drafted. So it is possible to split it out.
Vicki's just saying don't get rid of.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And I'm just suggesting you could split it out so it's by itself, and then you could deal with your experience internship thing.
Can we leave it
Separate.
as it currently exists?
Sure.
Just leave it, just
Sure.
leave
Yeah.
it like that.
Do you mean the language?
Yeah.
There was some, so for example, you've got language there that's like, shall be granted credit on a 100% basis. Some of that was losing its meaning. So some of the changes to the language were just meant to achieve some clarity.
Well, you're gonna want it under the direct supervision, I think.
Yeah, I think
And that's new wording.
Rebecca's talking about that last.
Maybe I'm confused about what you meant when you said as is. When you said as is, I thought you meant the current regulations,
The current,
810.
the current regulation, it can be reworded so that it matches whatever the new verbiage needs to be in order to clear it up. But don't change anything else on it. I mean, we're not saying it's, we're giving a path to licensure on experience only. We're allowing credit for work experience up to a certain number of years based on this, so you're not getting full credit. You see what I'm saying?
I guess not.
It's not an experience-only pathway right now. It's
Right
partial.
now, well, that's
then
question
that's what I
number
mean.
2, is how many years you're gonna assign to it. Right now, as is, question number 2 answers that by saying up to 5 years experience.
Right.
But Doug's point was, question number 1 is, do you approve experience-only pathway in the first place? Question 2 is, well, for how many years? Or well, that's what you're saying. Experience only would hit the 6 years, yeah.
So my suggestion was just change the verbiage so that it matches what it needs to based on new terminology. Don't change the number of years, so it's not a
I see what you're
true-
saying now. So you're saying No experience only.
You're saying no, you don't support a pathway.
Yeah.
See, I-
I've been saying that all along.
Right.
I'm hearing you.
Yeah.
Until there's a structured internship program, I cannot support that pathway. So-
Well, I mean, as it is, what we've done today is we have reviewed the text and approved the text to varying degrees, or we've sent it to a subcommittee. The next column is, is something we need to come back and discuss and revisit. So it's not, at this point, it's not.
No, the next column was part of my motion.
Yeah. Mark's motion
So
is
everything we
experience only.
approved with the column as it's written for the
I'm
document.
thinking,
Giving 6 years credit for experience.
Madam Chair,
I
I
want
would,
to
I would
switch-
like to vote on my
okay.
motion,
Okay.
please. I think it's time to either put this to rest
Okay.
or
Comments?
public comments?
Okay, so that's a lot to cover. So first I'd like to talk about the discussion of adding the internship, even though that's not your motion, it's related to the discussion.
If I may, if we could make this a little more narrowly tailored. If you have a comment on the motion on the floor, great.
Okay.
If not, why don't you wait till the motion speaks to what you're talking about? So for example, right now, the motion is number 12 as presented in this draft form with the addition of effective January 1, 2020.
Exactly.
When could I comment on this discussion?
If you have a comment on the motion.
I think if we're not closing out the discussion on this item, but he's called for the question, and the motion on the floor speaks to that. So as long as you're still gonna leave an opportunity to speak to the issue, the general issue, then I think.
Okay, so my comment is that we are here today to open pathways to licensure. We've already closed one, which is any bachelor's degree.
No, we haven't closed that.
Well, we've delayed it.
We've kicked it to a subcommittee.
We've delayed it 3 to 5 years.
We don't know how long it's been delayed.
Well, I mean,
We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know.
That's speculation.
it is
I don't
speculation.
think that's the motion.
Yeah, and really, we're talking about the
But
motion
he's
here.
called for
But
the
what I'm
question,
saying is,
so-
this is also delaying what we're here to do today, which is decide whether there should be an experience-only pathway. And rather than delay that, I'd rather see that motion voted on, whether there should be an experience-only pathway.
That's kind of.
That's the motion.
That's the motion, so that's what we're doing.
Wait, then I'm confused, because I thought the motion was in January 1st of 2020.
Exactly.
That's the
When it
effective
takes
date,
effect.
but the policy issue is should there be an experience-only pathway? That's what the said.
Okay, as a member of the public, I would rather not see that future date attached to the motion. I would rather you vote on the motion of whether experience only should be a pathway to landscape architecture today. Thank you.
Tracy's got a comment with that.
And CCASLA already sent their position, and that is, they don't want to see just an experience only. They want to make sure people have some educational background. And I know you're going to cure that with the education subcommittee, but I guess it just feel like if a person doesn't, it's like your vote in April, and that's what probably confused me when you were voting on reciprocity. It all kind of ties together, and what he's pointing out, that is, I think what CCASLA feels like is reciprocity, but I think their whole feeling is not experience only, so that's just their position. Sorry.
Okay.
Roll call? Patricia Trout.
Aye.
Mark Truscott, aye. Andrew Bowden.
Nay.
David Allen Taylor Jr.
Nay.
Stalemate, 2-2.
Motion fails to
Fails to carry.
Okay. The last agenda item.
Oh,
What?
no.
You want to take a break? Should we take a 5-minute break?
Oh,
Are
no.
we done with this issue?
No,
I don't know that
think
you're
you-
done with the issue.
I don't think you have to be. I heard members discuss the possibility of conceptual support moving forward of an experience-only pathway contingent upon something. I think there's still an opportunity to express a desire for expanding pathways, but it's a question for the committee if you want to go through that exercise.
Yeah, and it's hard to tell which aspect caused that. Was it the delayed date? Was it because you want to work things out in a working group? Was it because you want to do some other definition of experience? It was just, so.
Okay.
This is your opportunity to.
You have choices.
Get some closure?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I think we pretty much kind of know where you stand.
Are you sure? Because I would be happy to go for another round hour.
Okay, but DJ, I'd like to understand.
I
where you're coming from.
really, it was just the date too that kind of threw me, and I'm still, my thought is, if it were me, I would vote if something were put up to the extent of, do we accept experience only as a path to licensure? I would say yes, but then I would say, but before, so that's, yeah, okay, I support that, but I still think this task force that we've compiled of the landscape architect and LTC members, so on and so forth, as Mark presented earlier, we would kick that down to them for feedback as to what they think that structure should be, what pathway it is, how many years, all of that, and just provide some recommendations to the board and move forward that way on it.
Is that a motion?
Sure. Shall I try and make it a little? All right.
Yeah.
With regards to California Code of Regulations 2620, item or experience description A12, I would move that we accept it as written as far as the definition of pathway to licensure by experience only, and have our subcommittee, do we have a title name for that subcommittee? Education Subcommittee to look at how that pathway is the pathway itself is structured, defined, or otherwise achieved.
Meaning like the number of years assigned to it and things like that?
Number of years assigned to it, how.
And now I think you might have two different education subcommittees. So I think were you referring to the one that was created today with the one LHC,
Yes.
one license director?
Yes.
Okay.
That's
So
not education subcommittee. That's AUC.
as long as everyone's clear.
I get it.
Cool.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
just-
Okay.
That's my motion.
As I understand, the motion is, you mentioned the language, and then you mentioned passing it to the subcommittee that we formed earlier to give us feedback. Is that correct?
As to how we fill out the columns.
Fill out the columns. And did it also mean the structure of the mentorship, or?
Just not the structure of a mentorship. It's not anything about an internship program. It's the structure of what we should be considering, how this thing shapes up, or whatever. We're just providing us input, because I don't think we can get that figured out today. And we certainly can't rely necessarily or expect that we're going to have an LAXP or something. We have to. So I would like to get input from the committee, the subcommittee that we formed today, to provide feedback to us so that we can further develop what ends up in these columns.
Okay, we need a second.
You can second it.
I second.
DJ, am I clear then? It doesn't include a internship? It's just the amount of credit for it?
Not specifically an internship.
That would be determined by the subcommittee.
Because, I mean, then that just sounds like in concept that you agree with the experience pathway, only pathway.
You're just not figuring out the
And
years.
you're not figuring out the credit.
Correct.
So, I mean, it's a modification maybe of Mark's motion where you're taking out the implementation date and you're taking out the credit. Just in concept, you agree with the experience-only pathway and you're working on the amount of credit later, right?
Yeah.
Based on input from the subcommittee.
Okay, but not an internship component of it.
Right.
Okay.
We're gonna
I
get
think-
feedback from the.
I think that would be fair, the board, at least you came to a consensus that you agree there should be an experience-only pathway, and you're trying to determine the amount of credit to give towards it, or that's required.
That makes sense.
Does that mean at least 6 years is?
Well, they're not
We're-
discussing
yeah.
a year
We're
amount.
after the
Okay,
It's
that's
just
what
in
I thought, but then when you
concept.
said experience only work.
Yeah.
So conceptually, the group can make a recommendation, it's only worth 3 years, and then there's not a true pathway to licensure.
That's why I was asking you what that means.
But they're not, we're making the decision, and we're passing it to the CAB, and they're making the decision, really. So it's a recommendation from the subcommittee to us, and we adopt it and push it up to CAB for approval, and then it moves on.
Correct.
Well, maybe it could be that you're having that subcommittee examine if 6 years of experience is the right amount of credit to give towards it.
Sure.
Because 8 was mentioned.
Yeah.
That would be helpful.
Right.
That would
Yeah,
be helpful.
so then that would address giving
Exactly.
less, but you're asking the subcommittee whether or not 6 years is an acceptable amount to allow credit.
Because that at least answers the question, Doug's question, is experience only
Right.
sufficient?
Right.
And then the committee's just working out how much experience beyond, or,
How much?
yeah, how much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I didn't even address what was in here. Let's get the feedback.
I see what you mean, yeah.
Okay, we got a second?
You did.
I second, I'm sorry. No, I did.
Public
Okay.
comment. Public comment.
Public comment, please.
I throw my hands up. What am I going to do? I mean, I'm gonna have to pursue other avenues. This is insane. We just continue to delay and move things on to other committees. I just wanna see some action, something that isn't designed to fail at the California Architects Board. I'm sorry, I'm just airing my frustration. Maybe in the next agenda item, a miracle will happen.
Okay, I understand your frustration. Any other public comment?
These are people's lives. People's lives are affected by it.
Excuse me.
I'd like to call for the vote, please.
Roll call. Patricia Trout.
Aye.
Mark Truscott. Aye. Andrew Bowden.
Nay.
David Allen Taylor Jr.
Aye.
Motion carries 3-1.
Yeah, could we have a quick break?
Yeah, let's take a break. 5,
How long?
10-minute break.
10 minutes.